against McDonald's and its franchisees that accuse the fast food giant of violating workers' rights. As the Fight for 15 works to organize to get better pay and union rights at McDonald's, the NLRB is treating McDonald's as a joint employer, meaning the corporation, and not just individual franchise stores, is responsible for these labor law violations. Attorney David Dean represents fast food workers.
It's just common sense that McDonald's should be held accountable for the rights of workers at its franchise stores. Unlike some other franchisors, McDonald's requires its franchisees to use a McDonald's system that, in order to maximize sales, and that means revenue to McDonald's, prescribes every detail of production, service, staffing, and positioning within its mandated layout. McDonald's is the boss. It shouldn't be hiding behind the franchisees.
In 2014, the Labor Board's General Counsel issued a finding that McDonald's is a joint employer with its franchisees. That holds the corporation accountable for working conditions and means they have to deal directly with workers organizing for union rights and higher pay. Kathleen Ruckelshaus of the National Employment Law Project says the fast food industry is not the only one increasingly using franchisee outsourcing to try to escape responsibility for workplace conditions. That makes joint employer rulings all the more important.
Without joint employer accountability for the franchisor or contracting company at the top, these types of corporate outsourcing can result in a lack of responsibility for workplace conditions. And the result is that workers often have no real remedy when they don't get the pay they're owed, or as here, when they are fired for exercising their protected rights.
TransCanada is demanding $15 billion from the U.S. for rejecting the Keystone XL oil pipeline. The Canadian corporation's claim is being made under the NAFTA Free Trade Agreement Investor-State Tribunal. President Obama rejected the pipeline as not good for the nation or the environment. Global Trade Watch's Lori Wallach says this action is exactly the kind of attack on U.S. environmental policy that the president insisted could never happen under the controversial investor-state corporate tribunal trade agreement regimes. Wallach says the pending TPP trade deal would double this kind of liability, putting U.S. control over its own environmental policies at risk.
Workers Independent News is heard daily on The Rick Smith Show, live 3 to 6 p.m. coast to coast at thericksmithshow.com. The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
WIN is made possible in part by the National Association of Letter Carriers. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!"
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead. Make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
This town gonna be here long after I'm gone. East side, west side, people don't surrender. They've been down, but they still rise on. Oh, and this time is my time. All right, love or hate, it don't matter. 'Cause I'm gonna stand and fight. This time is my time. She got her ups and downs, but love or hate, it don't matter. 'Cause this is my time.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Jobs. Yep, big report out today. 292,000 jobs added in the month of December. Originally, Bloomberg BNA had thought it would be about 200,000. So this kind of blows the expectations a little bit out of the water. But is it enough? Just to keep up with demographic shifts. Should this be what the economy is growing at just to catch up? That's an interesting question. Now, over the last year, We have seen solid job growth this year. Something like 2.5 million jobs created in 2015. Will that continue into the new year? We shall see. 2015, much better than 2013. Not as good as 2014. We had average job growth per month of 221,000 in 2015, 100,000 in 2013. 20, we saw 260,000 a month. But here's the thing: while unemployment stays at 5%, no movement there, wages actually ticked down a penny. The average median wage went down a penny. And for me, this, we could talk about all the jobs that are created, and there are a lot in the service sector, a lot of food service jobs, a lot of cleaning hotel rooms, a lot of I'll cut your grass, you wash my dog, a lot of that stuff. Very few in the we're actually making things kind of jobs. In fact, that number hit, I think, 8,000 jobs created in the month of December. Now, and I understand the president, 2 years ago, I believe it was, he had a goal of 1 million manufacturing jobs. Right now, that goal of 1 million, it sits at about 384,000. I believe that was the beginning of his second term. So we're kind of ticking towards the end of this. We need to be creating about 51,000 manufacturing jobs each and every month to hit that goal. And here's the thing that bothers me. While you look at this and you go, it's great. 2015 created 2.5 million new jobs. Manufacturing really flatlined. And in fact, just yesterday we saw the story from Ohio that 200 steel workers were going to be laid off because of the dumping that's going on with the Chinese. And at some point, you've got to start looking at the economy a little bit differently. You've got to start thinking about how do we make sure that things go well here at home, and not these insane trade policies, and not this corporate agenda that seeks out the lowest wage, the most lax environmental regulations, and of course, the non-existent labor laws. I look at this and I keep saying, we should not be doing business with countries that are pulling us down. Sorry, I just don't see how you can have a trade agreement with a country like Vietnam or China or any of these places that are actually making conditions worse for everyone. Now, I know I've heard this 1,000 times, but we're helping, we're raising them up. Well, you don't raise them up by tearing yourself apart. And, just the other day we saw the numbers came out that last 40 years, wages have been stagnant, completely just deadlined. And the further down the work level you go, the further down the education level. People with master's degree do fairly well. People with college education still do okay. People with high school diplomas have really just petered out. The days of going to high school, getting out and getting a factory job that paid a livable wage, those are days of the past because of our trade policies. Now, can you redo some of that? Absolutely. But it comes back to policy and also bargaining power. I think back to my grandmother who worked in a retail setting all of her working life. When the kids went off and went to high school, and she said, well, I'm not going to sit home. I'm going to go get a job. So she worked at a small department store, little chain in the greater Cleveland area. It was the competitors, like Kmart and Sears and that kind of stuff, until Walmart came to town and crushed everyone. But that job paid a reasonable wage. I mean, when she retired in 1985, now think about this, it's 1985. Over a quarter of a century ago, well, geez, 31 years ago, she was making $8 an hour, 6 weeks vacation, full eye, full dental, full health care, all of that stuff, and a pension that she collects to this day. They don't make that in the retail world today. There are many people who don't have that today. And why did it happen then? Well, it comes down to collective bargaining. It comes down to bargaining power. It comes down to organizing. And it comes down to pretty simple. It doesn't get any simpler than this. that union contract that she had. And I have a couple of copies of it back at the house that, just you go, this was good stuff for low-wage workers. And you go, we can do this again. Those manufacturing jobs that we now look at as family sustaining and good jobs. These are good jobs for people to raise a family and support a community and all that. Those weren't always good jobs. How did they become good family sustaining jobs? How did they become middle class jobs? My grandfather always talked about, when he began in the trucking industry, making 17 cents an hour shoveling coal off the back of a coal truck. And how they would work them, just hours and hours. And during the winter, you worked 20 hours a day. There was no overtime. There was none of that stuff then. We're heading back in those directions. And that's what scares me. One of the things I give President Obama credit for was, having the Department of Labor, the NLRB, fight for faster union elections. In fact, just, the report I just saw from Bloomberg BNA that looked at what the president had done in the elections that have taken 24 days or less. The unions did fairly well. They won about 3/4 of the elections. Because what we know is when workers organize and they say, this is what we want, and we want to negotiate, and we want a better life for our family, a little bit of what we create. In those elections that are shorter, they do better. But when you start drawing them out to 2 months, 3 months, 4, 6, a year, to where the companies now can then begin targeting people and illegally firing and harassing and surveilling and, weeding out the quote-unquote troublemakers, the workers don't do as well, which is why we're seeing wages stagnant and declining across most of the working environment in this country. And that's kind of scary to me because I worry about what's left for my kids. I was fortunate when I got out of high school, when I got out of college, there was a trucking job that I could get. Back in the late 80s, I was making $15 an hour to start, healthcare, pension, all of that stuff. They don't make that today, and that's the scary part. There's no default. If you don't go to college and take on massive debt, and if you don't get an advanced degree, and you're not lucky enough to find a job that's going to pay your student loans off, you're screwed. There's no default. And I always think about that kid that I met on the Capitol steps, waiting for my turn to speak at one of the rallies, who said, look, they take this money away from education. They do this to me. There's no default for me. There's nothing for me to fall back on. He said, my grandfather and my father, they had the mill, but the mill's gone. There's no plan B here. And that's the problem what happened with our economy. There are well-paying professional jobs. There are well-paying jobs at the top, but everything else seems to be tapped down. And to me, it comes back down to this bit of organizing, this bit of actually fighting for a piece of the pie. So interesting numbers. We're going to dive into it a little bit more throughout the program. Love to hear your thoughts, your comments. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. We come back and take a quick break. We'll come back with Joe Sestak. The Admiral is again touring the Commonwealth, running corner to corner, up, down, back, forward, in his goal to push the new plan on how we're going to restore the American dream for working families. And I think it's a lofty goal. I'd love to hear what he's got to say on this. We're going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1939. That was the day a new radio show began on CBS Radio.
Welcome to the motion picture star's own radio program, The Gulf Stream Guild Show. With Jack Bentley, Joan Crawford, Reginald Gardner.
The show featured some of the biggest names in Hollywood. All of the actors' fees were donated to the Motion Picture Relief Fund. The fund was started in 1922 with the motto of taking care of our own. Proceeds from the show went to support the motion picture Country Home for retired workers in the film industry. These included actors, cameramen, set designers, and even security guards. These retired workers only paid what they could afford to live there. Eventually, the retirement home allowed working people from the television industry as well. Gulf Oil sponsored the program for its first 3 seasons. It was called the Gulf Screen Guild Show. Over the years, the show took on several other sponsors and names. It also migrated to NBC, then to ABC, and then back to CBS Radio. In all, it ran for 14 seasons and more than 500 episodes. In its early years, the show was a variety review. It included songs along with dramatic and comedy sketches. Later, the show recreated films for the radio audience. It was a challenge to get a whole film down to just 22 minutes. Films covered by the show included classics such as Casablanca, Arsenic and Old Lace, and Pinocchio. But despite the changes and challenges, the show raised $800,000 for the retirement home by 1942. The retirement home was almost closed in 2009, but continues operations. Workers in many industries have long found creative and collaborative ways to support each other and to truly take care of their own. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm Eric Woosterwald. Fox News has repeatedly rallied for looser gun laws, but their tone is different when it comes to Texas's new open carry law, which, among other things, makes it illegal for police to ask citizens to see their gun license. On Special Report with Brett Baer, reporter Casey Stiegel highlighted mounting concerns from local officials when it comes to determining who can legally have a gun.
Kevin Lawrence heads up the largest police union in Texas. He says the wording of the law is murky, and if officers are unable to ask for a license, there's no way of knowing who is packing heat legally.
That's the difficulty, is the uncertainty, not knowing for sure what the rules are, what authority the officers have. We need to get that clarified as much as possible.
A segment showing how looser gun laws could actually help criminals is unusual for Fox News. The network has long advocated for increasing Second Amendment rights and repeatedly attacked President Obama for proposing gun safety measures. For more on this and other stories, please visit MediaMatters.org.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME. We make Pennsylvania happen!
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
We need to stand united, for undivided we shall never fall. Remember all, we need to trust in and then forever call our brothers and our sisters, and all you and I are in. You and I both know that we can rely on it. The time is prime, planets aligned and no mistaking. For union resurrection, the anger has awakened. The sleeping giant, come on, yeah, we can do it. We need to revive, re-amp, and re-up the labor movement. Anything in life.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind. You can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. Taking a look at what's going on, I look at these job numbers, and it's kind of one of those things that you go, job numbers not bad, things working out. Things could be better. And as I've said, the wages have ticked down a bit. And you would think with this great job growth, with the number of jobs that are being created, 2.5 million additional jobs last year alone, you would think that wages would be going up because, supply and demand, all of that stuff. 5% unemployment, which used to be viewed as full employment, you would think wages would be going up. Families would be doing better. That hasn't been the case. And as I've said, I think that it comes back to collective bargaining. It comes back to policy. which is why who we put into office is so very important, which is why we've asked our good friend Admiral Joe Sestak to come back on the program, talk about his plan to restore the American dream for working folks. Joe, thanks for taking time for us.
Rick, it's always a pleasure.
So, I look at the job numbers just out today, 2.5 million new jobs last year, most in the service sector, manufacturing, not so much. But last month, 292,000 new jobs, but we actually, people lost wages. Wages actually went down a penny in the month.
You're absolutely right. Two things. One, with regard to your wages, we have to remember that the median level of income of working families today, that is the exact center, the family that's in the very middle of the middle class today, is earning $4,000 less in real income than in 1999. That's the problem. The middle class has been shrinking. I joined the Navy during the Vietnam War era. That year was the first year that the middle class shrunk in the history of America by a small percentage. And it kept up each year until last year, when the middle class is now smaller than the higher upper income class or the lower income class. That's the challenge we have in restoring the American dream.
Yeah, and I go back to, the 2004 election cycle. Yeah, John Edwards, running around talking about the two Americas. And, never mind his problems, set that all stuff aside. But the reality is he was right. We have split, and we are splitting continually into the two Americas, the haves and, well, the rest of us.
That's right. What you can see is that about that same year I talked about during the Vietnam War era, then the income was the percentage increase over the next few years. You can see something like 200% or so went to the upper income. What we cannot afford is to have trapped populations. And as you drive through our cities, even in our rural communities, what you find is these two different levels you've talked about. The problem is the lower one is growing larger.
And, as you look at this, we see so much coming out of Washington. I mean, yesterday, I don't know if you saw this just the other day, the 60-second repeal of the Affordable Care Act. And I go, for the problems that it has, I think if we would have spent those 62 votes and all of that energy and all of that vitriol and all of that in making it better, I think we'd be better off than just another wasted opportunity, another wasted tax dollar. It just seems to me we can't get things done anymore, Joe.
That's the problem down in the United States Senate. It has always was intended under our Constitution to kind of cool things down a little bit, slow things and look at them more wisely, because each person's there for 6 years. Then in the House of Representatives, where sometimes passions, because you've got a 2-year election cycle, say, well, let's quickly do this. But you know what? The Senate's become a deep freeze. And the rules of that Senate, the arcane, old rules there, is about the only thing that hasn't changed in America. And people use it down there just to stymie forward progress. And here's the interesting tidbit. We know today on the Affordable Care Act that the premiums on all 4 levels, gold, platinum, silver, all 4 bronze, are less than they are with the healthcare plans outside the Affordable Care Act. And not only that, next year, Medicare would have begun to run dry, starting to have headed towards insolvency if it wasn't for the Affordable Care Act that extended it almost a decade and a half.
So let's talk about the big plan, this idea to restoring the American dream for working people. Walk me through some of it. What's the idea?
The idea is that 2 conservative, 2 liberal think tanks came together just before the recession we came through a few years ago. They looked at those who were in their upper 30s, about the time you become set into where you're going to kind of be on the income strata. Are you going to be a radio host? Are you going to be a lawyer? Are you going to be a naval officer? Or what are you going to be? And they looked at those in their later 30s, generations, this generation, and each generation before that, their parents in their 30s, their grandparents in their 30s, and those that were in the late 30s, just before the recession, was the first generation in the modern history of America that had not done better than their parents in real income and benefits included. And the conclusion was the American dream has been broken. So when I walked across Pennsylvania and listened to people, I then published a book to say, how can we restore the American dream based upon what needs to be done, from education to the proper investment in small businesses, to ensuring that there's health security, to ensuring that there's a fair distribution to labor from the productivity that increases in our industry every year. And then as I continue to walk, I put out this plan that said, here's how we can restore the American dream, that wages will increase so that your children will have an opportunity to do better than you. It talks about manufacturing. It talks about assets that we don't take advantage of, those who have just come out from prison. Immigration it talks about, and even from education to seniors. There's no one magic wand like Harry Potter can wave. This is hard work, and you need someone, a senator, who will be down there and will make things happen rather than stop things from happening.
You know, I look. You brought up the manufacturing, and just in the last segment, we talked about the job growth. 292,000 jobs in December, but only 8,000 of them were manufacturing jobs. And we look at those as those production jobs, those making things, that value added kind of job that grows an economy. And I'm just not seeing that growth. And I believe it comes back to our trade policies. I believe it comes back to how much control corporate America has over our Senate and over our policy making. And to me, it's got to be putting people into those places that are thinking about the average guy, the ham and eggers who are going to work every day. I want someone like that.
You're absolutely right. When I had my first job in the Navy, I had the artisans, those who were the welders, those who were the electricians that made things happen. We know that large industries are taking advantage of the United States Senate. It's why I turned down lobbying offers from them after I didn't win the Senate race, because they impact unduly down there. Think about this. Right now, if a company closes a factory in Pennsylvania and opens it up in China, they get to write off their taxes. The cost of opening up and building a factory in China, we should close that. And yet a bill was there to say no and say, but if you close the factory in China and move it back here, we'll let you write that off for jobs here. And you know what? Industry rolled in on people like Senator Toomey and others, and they voted against it. Finally, this. Think about manufacturing alternative energy. Every $1 million invested in oil or gas industry gives you one job. Every $1 million invested in building a wind turbine, for example, where there's 400 tons of metal, manufacturing gives you 4.5 jobs because it's manufacturing. And that's what we got to emphasize and get politics, get rid of the money from high industry and individual donors that are unduly impacting restoring the American dream.
So we're maybe thinking about undoing some of the corrosive effects of Citizens United, maybe with some legislation, or because I look at this and you go, who's getting what they want out of our government, and it's certainly not working people.
This is you're absolutely right. I mean, this is probably the time in our history where the government of the people has been so looked down upon by the people, because it is not working for the people. And that's what our Constitution said, we the people. And whatever we the people want to proscribe, want to have, we should be able to say, look, we want health care for everyone and not have a small group that is unduly influenced by industry, a higher level, say, no, we don't. Let's try to repeal it. I think they've forgotten that they are public servants in the U.S. Senate for the people.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show with Joe Sestak. Website, joesestak.com, running for the U.S. Senate here in Pennsylvania. I look at this election, and you hear this a lot, Joe, that this election's, the most important ever. And I believe every election is the most important ever, because, that's deciding who gets what. This next term, these next several years, I think are really important, because we need folks who are thinking visionary. I want leadership. I want statesmen who are thinking of, investing in our infrastructure, investing in our kids and education, and doing a lot of the things that I think you talk about in this. And if folks want to take a look at the plan, the plan for restoring the American dream for working folks. We've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. Just click on his name, take you right there. Also at joesestak.com. But, I look at this and I think we've woefully underinvested in our own country. And that's really very troublesome.
You're absolutely right. Look, even the civil engineering review that was done of all the infrastructure we need in America to really regain where we have to be as the #1 in the world, whether it's waterways, whether it's airways, whether it's railways, whether it's roadways, it is approximately $150 billion more per year. And, I lay out in this Restoring the American Dream how we can do that. We can do it with public-private efforts together to make it happen. But to do it, we have to. Think about Pennsylvania. We rank like 49th out of 50 states as the least efficient, effective roadways in America. And our bridges rank us in the top 7 states of America as the most deficient. Trucks coming in have to request permission to go over certain bridges, and it gets denied because they're not structurally safe. Think of the impact on business. And then profits, and then jobs. So that means we have to restore the dream, not as just everyone wants to think of the dream, but wants to have a result to where wages are increasing again because we've done the proper investment, both in the infrastructure, yes, but in the human capital, the workers, the labor, so that they are most proficient and then get their fair reward in sharing half the productivity like they used to of industry becoming more efficient and effective because of them.
And beyond that are the jobs that be created by making sure that our infrastructure is tops in the world. I mean, the sad reality is we used to have the world's best infrastructure. We've fallen, I think the last thing I saw was 15th, 17th, somewhere down there.
Yes.
And you go, we should be at the top of this.
I mean, Rick, you hit it again because let's take this, boy, when I was in the United States Navy and I was about to depart, I was talking about the United States of America had 4 deep water ports that could handle the most advanced container ships in the world. The types like Hong Kong offloads, where you have the sophisticated infrastructure and the means to offload those containers quickly, swiftly, and then get them off on the railway, then get them on the roadway. Well, guess what? We still have about 4 superports now. China, since that time I used to make that speech in the Navy, has gone from 0 to about 12. Wait a moment. If we want to be the hub of where everything comes and flows efficiently and effectively, we have to invest in that. And the revenues from that and the jobs created from that more than pay back for that investment.
So the question then becomes, what has the incumbent Senator Toomey done in his 6 years? What has he done to promote that stuff? Everything I see coming out of the senator, and I'm sure you've got a much more intimate knowledge of this, everything I see from him is stopping things. And with another one of these folks with the tax cut fetish, we can't raise revenues to invest in things. It just seems like everything stops at we have the tax cuts and we give rich people more and more. And well, the rest of you suffer.
Here's what he did 2.5 years ago. As the transportation bill, the infrastructure bill was coming up for a vote, he said here in Pennsylvania, we must have a long-range plan for transportation. Then he went down to Washington, D.C., and quietly voted against it, in fact, filibustered it, so it would die in the Senate. Then he went in front of a Tea Party forum in Washington, D.C., and was overheard by a journalist who heard him comment, "We did something constructive today. I told you we'd kill it, the transportation bill, and we did." That's the same thing he does for veterans. He says, "I'm concerned about my veterans." Veterans, he says, those who are committing suicide at too high a rate, those that don't have a job, the benefits that they need are being slowed. And yet, as a congressman, after he voted to send us to war, he voted against every Veterans Administration bill up until he was embarrassed this last December when there was the scandal in VA. Where was he for us vets when he said he was, but his votes were against it?
Amazing stuff. Last question I've got for you. We're seeing a lot of talk around the gun issue. The president issued the executive order, had the CNN thing last night, fake news on Fox saying, he's putting peppers and onions in his eyes. We see the insanity out in Oregon. What do we do, and what has the senator done to move anything on the gun issue?
Once again, we watched where finally an unfortunate massacre, Newtown, moved him to say he wanted background checks. The vote failed, and he said, we had our vote. It is now over. And yet Senator Manchin said, it's not over. I'm going to continue to fight like we do in the military. You want the guy in the foxhole next to you every night as the adversary is coming against you, every night. 2 years later, another massacre happened, and he came forward again, but only then backed off. Here's the issue. Twice he said in his last campaign how he really felt. He said, my idea of gun control is a steady aim. I don't think you do things for political reasons. I don't think you do things just because there's been a massacre. Your job as a leader is to prevent that massacre. And yet he was absent for so long until they happened. And that's my disappointment in Senator Toomey.
Yeah, I'm with him. Joe, I appreciate the time, man. Good luck on this latest tour as you are out there on the road talking about how we rebuild the American dream and really, restore that dream for average, everyday working folks. I give you the credit, and I hope the best for you.
Thanks, Rick. Have a great day. Thanks for having me on.
Great talking with you. Again, you can check out the website, joesestak.com, or you can look at the plan. Go to thericksmithshow.com. Click on Joe's name. Take you right there. Quick break right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
90% of the wealth, 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth. Where do you fit in? Take a look at yourself. 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth.
Where smart policy and sound investment matters. The Rick Smith Show.
And they have protected many thousands of houses from floods, but they don't always do enough.
Britain's new flood defenses already overwhelmed.
That is due to climate change.
Climate change turbocharging record El Nino extreme weather. State of emergency for Flint, Michigan water crisis. Plus, TransCanada sues Obama over Keystone XL pipeline rejection.
All of that rejection and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
The entire scientific community has concluded that climate change is real, causing major problems, and Trump believes that it's a hoax created by the Chinese.
Oh, as if it isn't, Bernie Sanders. This is your Green News Report.
Surprised it wasn't the Mexicans. Usually.
Okay, Desi Doyen, it's our first Green News Report of the new year.
Yep.
So you better make it good. Now, I understand that we've just got data from NOAA, finding that 2015 was the second warmest year on record for the U.S.
Yep, that's right.
So when we had this really, really cold winter last year in the Northeast, even with that, it was still the second warmest year on record in the U.S., and we're still waiting for the global numbers. And I think 2015 will have been the warmest year on record for the globe, but we'll find out. What else do you have for us to start the year, Desi Doyen?
Canadian company TransCanada has filed suit against the Obama administration, seeking $15 billion in damages over the rejection of the Keystone XL pipeline, calling it arbitrary, unjustified, and a breach of the NAFTA trade agreement. This type of legal action, a corporation seeking to overturn a nation's policies using international free trade agreements, is exactly what critics have been warning will happen with the proposed Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, free trade agreement.
So TransCanada has gone to federal court and filed a complaint, but they've also filed a separate complaint under this extrajudicial process that takes place under NAFTA. That is just the thing that critics of TPP have been warning and complaining about. and especially environmentalists.
In Michigan, Republican Governor Rick Snyder has declared a state of emergency for the city of Flint to speed up resources to deal with widespread lead contamination in the drinking water supply. The U.S. Attorney's Office is now investigating why state officials told residents for months that the contaminated water was safe to drink when it was most definitely not.
Snyder's administration knew about this. He allowed the lead poisoning to go on. I think this may cost Rick Snyder his office. If it doesn't, it should.
In California, Governor Jerry Brown has declared a state of emergency, ordering California agencies to move more quickly to resolve an ongoing massive natural gas leak at a storage facility near Los Angeles that has forced evacuations of over 2,000 nearby residents. Southern California Gas Company admitted last week that its ruptured well does not have a type of deep safety valve that might have stopped the leak because it wasn't required by law. The U.S. Department of Justice has filed civil charges against German automaker Volkswagen for violating the Clean Air Act after Volkswagen admitted it used secret software to cheat U.S. emissions regulations in over 500,000 diesel cars sold in the U.S.
And what kind of fines are they facing if they're found guilty of this?
Maximum potential of $48 billion with a B.
Ain't enough.
Britain just had its wettest December in history and likely will for January, too, with a relentless string of multiple storms bringing record flooding to northern England, which has already overwhelmed new billion-dollar flood defenses that were installed after disastrous flooding just a few years ago. Critics say Conservative Prime Minister David Cameron didn't spend enough. He defended his policies on the BBC.
After any one of these events, it's right to sit down and look at what you've spent, what you've built, look at what you're planning to spend, look at what you're planning to build, and work out, is it in the right places? Are we doing it the right way? Do we need to do more? And we'll ask all those questions.
And you need to ask, did you do it soon enough? I don't think any of us are prepared for what's coming, and I think the massive deaths, not just here in the U.S., but all around the globe over the holidays, underscores that once again.
And speaking of that extreme weather over the holidays, meteorologists and climate scientists say El Nino is partly to blame for that extreme weather. Record-breaking heat in December that fueled extreme weather that killed nearly 70 people. Deadly tornadoes in the southwest and the southeast, including one that narrowly missed my own sister. And, of course, the torrential rains and ongoing deadly flooding in Missouri and Illinois. However, according to climate scientist Michael Mann on MSNBC, climate change is also a major contributor.
Part of it is due to El Nino, but the fact that this is the strongest El Nino we have ever seen during what just finished up as the warmest year we have ever seen, that is due to climate change.
The mainstream media will cover El Nino, but they won't talk about how it is supercharged by climate change. Your sister doing okay?
She's fine.
I know that tornado missed her house by about 4 houses. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us and follow us on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Here you come again. And here I go. Here I go. Ringing up the sails.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
You can see them every morning in the factories and the fields, in the city streets and the quiet country towns.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Looking across over to Pakistan. I don't usually get into a lot of international labor stories, but this one, this is where we're headed. This is where we're going. If you continue with all of the attacks on workers, the war on workers, and understand Monday, there's a big rally in Washington, D.C., 9 a.m. In front of the Supreme Court building to protest the SCOTUS decision on Friedrichs versus the California Teachers Association, which, as I've been saying for a long time, is going to be pretty much the death knell of organized labor in this country, of collective bargaining. Because, and it's amazing to me that we're even having this conversation, that you're going to allow free riders and people to take advantage of things and not pay for it. It just blows my mind in this kind of a country. Maybe you get that in others where, you have socialism. I get this is frustrating to me. But I look at Pakistan and understand, this is, to me, you start looking down the future where we start chipping away at workers' rights. We start destroying the ability of collective bargaining. We start destroying the ability of people to come together. Here in Pennsylvania, passed the stalking law. Talking to your coworkers is now, I guess, going to be stalking. But 35 workers were arrested in the city of Mardan on the 6th of this month for simply peacefully protesting in front of the Philip Morris International Tobacco Company subsidiary there in Pakistan. Evidently, they were terminating a whole bunch of this mass firing of workers. And the workers wanted to protest. And they called out the police and they called out the law enforcement, and I always love this, under the maintenance of public order law. It's so very Orwellian. Under the maintenance of public order law, they rounded up these 35 people, and now they're going to be locked up for 90 days without any charges being against them, without anything. They're just going to be grabbed up and they're going to be locked up and move. This is the greatest thing because, a bunch of people were outraged. You signed petitions, all of this stuff. And I went through it as well. And, they were going to go to the jail to hold a rally and, to take the petition and, try and get these folks out. Turns out that that the police had moved these people from the city of Mardan 250 kilometers away to one of these notoriously horrible prisons where they actually incarcerate Taliban activists, where the Taliban is locked up. Now we're taking these working people and we're throwing them with it. Now stop and think about this for a second. Just on a couple of fronts. One is the obvious fact that, any workers protesting or any worker in general who has the audacity to stand up and say anything in these countries are now akin to terrorists. Then the other part is it seems to me like they're attempting to make more terrorists by putting the working people in these situations. It scares the hell out of me. But I look here and I stop and think about what's going on in our backyard and how, you see illegal firings all the time and no mechanism really to punish the employers. And I fear this is where we're heading. And so, as I said, at 9:00 on Monday, there's going to be a big protest. The nurses, the teachers, the public sector workers, and in my view, it should be every working person should be there. Because this is, to me, is kind of the end of industrial peace. And I started thinking back, to my labor history background. You go back, you think about the Knights of Labor, you think about the IWW, you think about all of these attempts to organize in the past. And there are hundreds of organizations who propped up and fell based on, the swings of membership or also being deliberately crushed by government policy. Are we reliving one of those moments? And as I look at this, and understand, every time the labor movement of an era, go back to the 1860s, 1870s, every time something rose, it was crushed and things got worse. Until eventually people were desperate and beaten and they began to organize and rise again. Are we living through kind of the same thing? Is this going to be one of those moments that someone looks back at in 50, 100 years and goes, well, that was the beginning of the end, or was this the beginning of the next wave? And, as someone who just kind of sits back and observes these things, that's what's, kind of interesting. It's these policymakers, it's these right-wing ideologues who, at the behest of their corporate overlords, are the ones who are just crushing people's ability to support their families. And it's it's going to be interesting to see where this case goes. And I understand it's being heard now. The decision will come out sometime between April and June. Very, very interesting to find out where that goes. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around.
Trees of green, red roses too. I see them blue for me and you. And I say to myself, what a wonderful world.
Yes, it is all about the children, even after they're born. Rick Smith.
With marijuana prohibition finally ending in states and cities across the land, including full legalization and or commercialization in Alaska, Colorado, Washington State, Oregon, and Washington, D.C., who better than our friend Willie Nelson to lead the way for weed quality and social responsibility? The iconic musician and intrepid fighter for justice has announced that he will market his own marijuana brand, Willie's Reserve, and open a group of stores selling top-quality pot and paraphernalia. I feel like I was buying so much of it, it's time to start selling it back, Willie said of his new weed venture. I'm looking forward to working with the best growers in Colorado and Washington to make sure our product is the best on the market. A tireless champion of small farmers, civil liberties, the environment, common sense, and the common good, he plans to start rolling out his stores and products, including hemp goods, this year. And he'll expand further as state laws allow. In the typical Willie way, the stores will be, quote, the anti-Walmart model, with a core purpose of helping expand the market for small, energy-efficient, environmentally sound growers. Over the years, I have cited Willie's work in calling for legalization and restoration of hemp farming in America. I've also called repeatedly for an end to the Orwellian Kafkaesque drug war that has criminalized the cannabis equivalent of cocktail hour. 750,000 people are arrested each year for marijuana-related offenses. This is Jim Hightower saying, and now I salute the innumerable grassroots activists who've steadily pushed America from the darkness of marijuana madness to being able to light up a Willie without getting busted. Find out more at Marijuana Policy Project, MPP.org, and also at normal, NORML.org. That's normal, NORML.org.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's populist take on what the powers that be are up to. Find out more at hightowerlowdown.org.
Don't have a phone? Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
There's a thundercloud exploding, and I'm free at last, like Joe Hill and Cesar Chavez, who fought in their own time, like our brothers and our sisters, up and down that picket line, like the unnamed and unnumbered, who struggle brave and long, like the Union men and women, standing up and standing strong, like the unnamed and unnumbered, who struggle brave and long, like the Union men and women, standing up and standing strong.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So, you got to love this. This is one of those things that just, you go, how obvious, how outrageous, how ridiculous. I look at this story from the Philly Inquirer. There's a company in Malvern, Pennsylvania. And again, you can't make this stuff up. And I guess it scares me on one front that you have this company that files they produce a newsletter, keeping up to date on payroll, while they're cheating their workforce out of millions of dollars in wages. In fact, the U.S. District Judge L. Felipe Restrepo has given the Department of Labor and this company, American Future Systems, a little bit of time, I guess, to come up with a proposal on how they're going to pay all of their workers the back pay that they've cheated them out of. Now, what was going on at this company? Who evidently a lot of them are, phone operators. And you're taking horrible phone calls from people. What they said is they've actually written down that if you need to take a break Take a break anytime you want. Go to the bathroom, go out and have a cigarette, go do whatever it is you're going to do. But we're not paying you anything for it. So the only time you're going to get paid is when your butt's in the seat and you're working. And it immediately reminded me to a job that I had applied for, back in the early 90s, where they said, you come in, your time clock will be at the door where the truck is supposed to back into. And when the truck hits the back of the door, you punch in. When you're done unloading it and the truck moves and you close the door, you punch out. And you stand there on your own time and wait for the next one to come in. And they may come maybe 5 minutes, maybe a half hour, maybe 2 days. But that's your time, not theirs. This is the same kind of idea, only they've taken it down to micro. You got to go to the bathroom on your own time. You got to go get a drink of water on your own time. You need to get up and walk across the room just to stretch your legs on your own time. Well, this Judge Restrepo has said, no, not going to go there. You owe these 6,000 workers in 14 facilities across Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Ohio. You owe them $1.75 million. Now, here's their defense. And truly, this is, in their defense, they don't have to give bathroom breaks. They don't have to give any breaks whatsoever. And I love that people tell me, well, it's the law that they have to give us breaks, and it's the law that they have to give us lunch, and it's the law that they have to do. Some states, yes, it's not a federal law. And it's certainly not a law that you have to be able to go to the bathroom, which has always been amazing to me, but that's the truth. So it's interesting that this judge is now saying, well, you can't do that. Now, federal law does say that if you do give breaks of under 20 minutes, that you have to pay them. But it doesn't say you have to give them. It just says that if you do. So I guess the way Restrepo has thought of this, and this is the difference in why elections matter. This is the difference between a judge who sees things from a working person's point of view and one who sees it from a corporate point of view. I seriously doubt Samuel Alito or Clarence Thomas or Anton Scalia or any of those right-wing judges would see this in the same light. They would say, well, the company went to the letter of the law, and they don't have to give breaks, so you're on your own time. Now, where Restrepo has this bit of ground to stand on, I think, is that, and this was kind of shocking to me, that when you took out the bathroom breaks and all of the other time from their day, they actually didn't end up making minimum wage. So this is where the real violation of the law is. And I would argue that the right wing would figure out a way to get around that. So here they had, I guess, till today to come up with a plan. So I'm going to be looking into this next week to see what the big plan is and how it is that they're going to be able to continue to stick it to workers in the coming year. But think about it, 6,000 people. I got to wonder what their turnover rate is. I got to wonder how horrible their turnover rate is. Also here, how many people are a big fan of the Utz, the potato chip people? How many fans? Well, a lawsuit has been filed against the snack company down there in Hanover, Pennsylvania. WITF reported earlier this week that 3 drivers from Ohio, West Virginia, and here in Pennsylvania have filed suit saying, look, we work in excess of 40 hours. We bust our behinds driving from one place to another, stocking the shelves, doing all this stuff. We should get overtime pay. Now, what's interesting is Utz has upwards of 1,900 people who could join into this suit. This could be trouble for them. Their defense, and this comes back to my view on how we misclassify folks. Their defense is, well, they're not truck drivers. No. They're not drivers. They're not delivery people. No. They're salespersons. They're salespeople. So salespeople who get a little bit of commission stuff, not eligible for overtime. I'm going to be interested to see where this goes. Because again, much like the misclassification stuff out on the West Coast with FedEx and McDonald's and all that, this is going to be interesting because they've been getting away with this stuff for years. for years. Anyway, if you missed any portion of the program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast, The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. The National Labor Relations Board's General Counsel has issued a series of consolidated complaints against McDonald's and its franchisees that accuse the fast food giant of violating workers' rights. As the Fight for 15 works to organize to get better pay and union rights at McDonald's, the NLRB is treating McDonald's as a joint employer, meaning the corporation, and not just individual franchise stores, is responsible for these labor law violations. Attorney David Dean represents fast food workers.
It's just common sense that McDonald's should be held accountable for the rights of workers at its franchise stores. Unlike some other franchisors, McDonald's requires its franchisees to use a McDonald's system that, in order to maximize sales, and that means revenue to McDonald's, prescribes every detail of production, service, staffing, and positioning within its mandated layout. McDonald's is the boss. It shouldn't be hiding behind the franchisees.
In 2014, the Labor Board's General Counsel issued a finding that McDonald's is a joint employer with its franchisees. That holds the corporation accountable for working conditions and means they have to deal directly with workers organizing for union rights and higher pay. Kathleen Ruckelshaus of the National Employment Law Project says the fast food industry is not the only one increasingly using franchisee outsourcing to try to escape responsibility for workplace conditions. That makes joint employer rulings all the more important.
Without joint employer accountability for the franchisor or contracting company at the top, these types of corporate outsourcing can result in a lack of responsibility for workplace conditions. And the result is that workers often have no real remedy when they don't get the pay they're owed, or as here, when they are fired for exercising their protected rights.
TransCanada is demanding $15 billion from the U.S. for rejecting the Keystone XL oil pipeline. The Canadian corporation's claim is being made under the NAFTA Free Trade Agreement Investor State Tribunal. President Obama rejected the pipeline as not good for the nation or the environment. Global Trade Watch's Lori Wallach says this action is exactly the kind of attack on U.S. environmental policy that the president insisted could never happen under the controversial investor-state corporate tribunal trade agreement regimes. Wallach says the pending TPP trade deal would double this kind of liability, putting U.S. control over its own environmental policies at risk.
Workers Independent News is heard daily on The Rick Smith Show, live 3 to 6 p.m. coast to coast at thericksmithshow.com. The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
WIN is made possible in part by the National Association of Letter Carriers. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Now the lessons of the past were all learned with workers' blood. The mistakes of the bosses we must pay for. From the cities to the farmlands and trenches full of mud. 'Cause war has always been the boss's way, sir. Come on! The union forever defending our rights.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. So according to the Boston Globe, if you're sitting on one of these corporate boards, if you're one of the fortunate few board of directors folks, the average pay to sit in one of those seats, about $258,000 per year. Now, that sounds like not a lot of money for a lofty position, if you will. But understand, you're talking about the board of director spending as much as a whopping 5 hours per week doing that job. And I go, how do I get a gig like that? 5 hours a week and over $250,000 a year? Sign me right up. Sign me right up. And what I keep saying, we need to be more like Germany in this front. You need to get workers in those boards. Just my thought. But anyway, a big job number out, 292,000 jobs created in December, only 8,000 manufacturing jobs. And here to maybe weed through some of the numbers, where the what's, the whys, and all of that, our good friend Matías Vernengo, professor of economics at Bucknell University, also a fantastic blogger, nakedkeynesianism.blogspot.com. Matías, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, no, thank you for having me, Rick.
So big news. I mean, 292,000, well above the expectations of 200,000. Is this a good thing?
Yeah, well, sure, and you know that sort of rounds what we talked last time. So that if you think of the global economy, the U.S. is not doing that bad. The rate of growth of wages also for the whole year was about 2.5%. And unemployment remains at 5%, which many, I wouldn't be among those, but many think it's close enough to full employment.
Yeah.
So it's as good as you might expect.
And I look at this, and you as a political observer, not an economist, but as a political observer, I remember going back to 2009 when Obama took office, and we were in free fall, and all of the Republicans and all of the anti-Obama crowd were saying, that stimulus is going to, it's going to destroy us. And when he took office the second time, saying the economy is going to collapse, everything's going to go to haywire. And I go, 2.5 million jobs last year, not horrible.
No, it's pretty good. From that perspective, it sort of shows that even with moderate, the fiscal package has sort of gone long ago, and so moderate fiscal stimulus and the remaining programs of the New Deal. That's I always say people forget, and the fact that we have institutions, unemployment insurance, Social Security. All of those things, obviously Medicare, Medicaid, so those not from the New Deal, but from the 60s, and those things have allowed the economy to sort of recover. It could be better, but given the circumstances, it's pretty good. As you said, at the beginning of this, we were shedding 800,000 jobs per month. So now we're adding at 200 or so thousand per month. So this is reasonably good.
And what gets me is I think back to that era, to that 2009, where I was saying at the time on this program, look, we need chunky, we need big, we need a huge shock to the economy in the way of stimulus to prime the pump to get things going. And everyone's saying, no, we just need tax cuts, and we need just austerity, cut. And it seemed to me dumb then. I wonder, and I guess this is just an exercise in futility. Had we followed a very robust kind of package idea, and maybe not had a recalcitrant Congress for the last 7 years, I wonder how things would have been.
Oh, we would be in much better shape. I should say in December, they actually, when they finally finalized the deal that will allow us not to have a debt ceiling crisis again, at least not until the next president, and they did allow for reasonably sort of maintenance of spending during this year. So I wouldn't expect this to be a terrible year. It's not going to be great, that's for sure, but it's not going to be a terrible year. The sort of issue here is the question of manufacturing jobs. Mining jobs have continued to collapse, and manufacturing jobs did not increase that much over the years. Just previous year, 2014. Manufacturing jobs increased significantly. I don't remember, the number by heart, but I think it's more than 200,000. This year was less than 30. I mean, in 2015 it was less than 30,000 overall. So a much slower recovery in the manufacturing sector.
And what's worrying me?
So that goes to the quality of jobs, so to speak. Lots of jobs in services that have increased, but not on good old, manufacturing jobs.
Yeah, I mean the I'll wash your dog, you wash my windows economy is doing quite well.
Yeah, and still we have the other thing is that there are lots of people that are underemployed, working less hours than they would like. I mean, I don't want to saying that we're fine, and it's true given all of the complaints and the stuff that Republicans wanted to do, but we're in much worse shape than we could be if we have done, say, a significant infrastructure bill or something like that.
Right. So here's the other part of my concern. I mean, at the end of December, the Federal Reserve said they were going to begin raising interest rates. How much of that decision will slow the job growth? Because there's this thought, I guess, that we can't have too heated of a job market because we might see rising wages. Heaven forbid.
Well, at the end of the day, it's a little bit part of what they really want to do. So I think that Janet Yellen is sort of afraid to increase it too much and slow the economy too much. But one has to remember that that's the objective of this. They want to maintain unemployment at relatively high levels so that workers do not ask for higher wages, and hence inflation is kept in check. So the whole point of this is, to some extent, the Fed is working to restrain wage growth. And as I said, wage growth wasn't particularly fast. It was 2.5%, if I'm not wrong, last year, which is certainly not anything, incredible, considering the low levels of inflation we have. It's marginally, increase in real terms. So that's the objective. It's actually to keep workers in line, and that's a good chunk of what the Fed does. So I'm sorry to say that that's still a good part of what Democrats do. So there has been some questioning of how much Janet Yellen will have support from the more progressive, more liberal, I want to say, perhaps, members of the Federal Open Market Committee not to continue raising, or if they do continue raising it at a very low pace.
Okay, well, and that wouldn't be horrible, but still not preferable. Because, I look at this and I look at the stagnant wages, which have been, really, there are a couple of studies I've seen recently. If you're looking at 40 years of wage stagnation and actual declining of wages.
Exactly right. With productivity growth. So by the way, this goes also to the heart of a very conservative but very popular idea. The notion is that if wages have been stagnated, is because people are, say, not particularly efficient in what they do. They have not been trained to do the kinds of new jobs that we need. So the idea is, we used to have all of those guys working at, Ford and GM and whatnot, but now we have a new kind of economy, Apple and whatever, Facebook, and we need a new set of skills. And the blue collar workers are not trained to do that stuff. They have the wrong kinds of skills. And because they have the wrong kinds of skills, the only thing that they can do is, sell, Big Macs or something along those lines. So it's their fault.
Right.
And it turns out that when you look at the data, labor productivity has increased incredibly. So workers are incredibly productive, and wages have not gone up. So the point is, it used to be the norm that when productivity went up, those gains in productivity ended up in the pockets of workers. But over the last 30 years, or as you said, 40 years, it's actually it's more like 40 now, it's early 70s, wages have stagnated.
Yeah, I mean, at least me, I was raised to believe in the idea of that meritocracy that we're told is out there. The harder you work, the better you do. The more you produce, the more you get. And all of that stuff. The sad reality is, as you've just pointed out, productivity is skyrocketing. Wages have actually deadlined and declining. So we're working harder, longer, producing more, and falling behind, which just seems insane to me. So again, I come back to what could be the root cause of this. And the one thing that, maybe it's just how I think, but the one thing that I keep coming back to is the lack of bargaining power that workers have on the job.
Yes, no, I would agree exactly with that. That I think is the central issue. So that remuneration has been tied not so much to the efficiency and the ability of workers, but to the ability of unions to bargain. And two things that are central in that story is the complete collapse of unionization rates. So we used to have more than 30% of the labor force as member of unions, and now it's a third of that. And the other thing is the globalization process that has, first of all, it has reinforced this sort of bargaining power, because a lot of the manufacturing jobs that were union jobs were lost, and service jobs tend not to be. And but also in price competition from abroad and lower prices, and so a tendency to erode the ability of workers to demand higher wages. And so those things have been sort of central in the and you know, what one should say, macroeconomic policy has played a role in this. So monetary policy, but also fiscal policy. The fact that we have essentially in the U.S., in all fairness, after the initial stimulus, we've been almost pursuing, you know, compared to Europe, moderate, but you know, still austerity policy. So
right.
Fiscal austerity and now the even moderate tightening of monetary policy moves us in the wrong direction again. So weakening the ability of workers to bargain for higher wages.
But I look at this, and I started off at the beginning with this article in the Boston Globe that points out that, you know, people sitting in these corporate boardrooms, these boards of director folks making on average $258,000 for 5 hours a week of work. I would love to see if someone did a study from 40 years ago what boards of directors made back then to what they're getting today, and how that happened and where that money comes from.
Sure, yeah, and you can go even further. The symbiotic relation between the board and the CEOs, and CEOs that are accountable only to stockholders, that they have no interest in the effects of their decisions on their working class, working force. So all of those things are important. Which, by the way, the symbiotic relation between the boards and the CEOs have opened the window for all sorts of fraud and manipulations that things like Enron and whatnot, and eventually to the banking crisis and financial crisis in 2008. So all of those things are tied, and you're absolutely right that the gap there, in terms of remuneration between boards and CEOs and blue collar workers at the plant level, it's skyrocketed.
Just nuts. I mean, you say it's a symbiotic relationship. I say it's an incestuous pool. But it's the same way of getting there. It's just a little different. Matías, I look forward to the coming year. I think this is going to be a good year. We'll see how these changes at the Fed work, and what the coming year holds for workers across the country and across the world. And I look forward to our weekly segments. I appreciate the time, man.
Oh, thank you. I look forward to it.
Always great talking with Matías Vernengo. Again, you want to check out some great writing, economics across the globe, nakedkeynesianism.blogspot.com, the website. We've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Through the door, it's desperate times, so desperate measures we explore. Marching on the Capitol to lobby leaders for involvement. 3,000 people screaming out, "Where's our government?" Lawsuits and arraignments, members under company surveillance. Public divided, either they love us or they hate us. Profit billions off our back, and it's still not enough. They should have took into account that we never give up. We'll be here one day longer. The people's voice is stronger. We work hard for our money. We work hard for respect. Keep fighting for these rights for generations. It's next. One day longer. One day longer. The people's
Your
voice is
working class
stronger.
radio experience, where hard work, common sense, and rational thoughts are a reality. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1939. That was the day a new radio show began on CBS Radio.
Welcome to the Motion Picture Star's own radio program, The Gulf Screen Guild Show. With Jack Bendy, Joan Crawford, Reginald Cotton.
The show featured some of the biggest names in Hollywood. All of the actors' fees were donated to the Motion Picture Relief Fund. The fund was started in 1922 with the motto of taking care of our own. Proceeds from the show went to support the Motion Picture Country Home for retired workers in the film industry. These included actors, cameramen, set designers, and even security guards. These retired workers only paid what they could afford to live there. Eventually, the retirement home allowed working people from the television industry as well. Gulf Oil sponsored the program for its first 3 seasons. It was called the Golf Screen Guild Show. Over the years, the show took on several other sponsors and names. It also migrated to NBC, then to ABC, and then back to CBS Radio. In all, it ran for 14 seasons and more than 500 episodes. In its early years, the show was a variety review. It included songs along with dramatic and comedy sketches. Later, the show recreated films for the radio audience. It was a challenge to get a whole film down to just 22 minutes. Films covered by the show included classics such as Casablanca, Arsenic and Old Lace, and Pinocchio. But despite the changes and challenges, the show raised $800,000 for the retirement home by 1942. The retirement home was almost closed in 2009, but continues operations. Workers in many industries have long found creative and collaborative ways to support each other and to truly take care of their own. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Tales of American Political History with Clinton Porter Hackney.
We've been discussing the signers of the Declaration of Independence, including interesting facts and their steely courage. John Hancock was president of this Continental Congress that adopted the Declaration, and it's presumed that he signed first. His large, flamboyant signature became iconic. One account of his signing that speaks to their courage has it that he held it up and said, "There, I guess King George will be able to read that." And another story of the same vein has it that once the signing was done, Hancock said, "Now we must all hang together." And Ben Franklin quickly replied, "Yes, we must indeed all hang together, or most assuredly we shall hang separately." No matter what each of these men did before or after signing the document, and whether they sought it or not, the actual signing of the Declaration of Independence ensured all of them instant immortality. This is Clinton Porter Hackney at cphackney.com.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME.
We make Pennsylvania happen!
And finally, we don't have unions in South Carolina. I wear heels, and it's not for a fashion statement. It's because we kick, and we kick those unions hard, and they will not step foot in the state of South Carolina.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. So the beginning of the year, not a bad beginning of the year for low-wage workers. 14 states across the country bumped up their minimum wage from Alaska to West Virginia. They got a little bump in their paychecks, but not as much as they got in California and Massachusetts, who saw upwards of $1 increase, up to $10 an hour in those places. Now, here's the thing, and this is what I've been saying for a very long time. Organized labor spends an awful lot of time, energy, money, resource in going after and fighting for the minimum wage, which is the right thing to do. And, I've had these debates back and forth where you go, is it beneficial for, the workplace of all workers to fight for increases in the minimum wage? Or do you want a militant workforce? Because I think on Monday, when the Supreme Court continues to hear the Friedrichs versus California Teachers Association case, at some point there's a thought, and I don't want to have to see this, but there's a thought that goes through my mind that if it goes the wrong way, and you see the end of the 1930s era industrial peace model, which is where we come to a table and we hammer out an agreement that both parties can live with, without having to having strikes and all of the things that lockouts and all the things that go on when you don't have industrial peace, when you're not sitting across the table bargaining and talking to each other. when you're not, well, because as I've always said, if you're not seated at the table, you're on the menu. So at the end of this, what happens on Monday, I think, is going to be very important, because the next generation of workers, if this goes the wrong way, I think you end up back at the end of the 1880s, 1890s with a very militant labor movement of not people who are engaged in politics, but people who are in the streets and banging drums and doing all kinds of civil disobedience. I think that's where we go back to, because desperation, really, honestly and truthfully, makes people do things that if you're not desperate, you're not going to do. And I think for too long, workers in this country have had something to lose. You're not going to go out on strike if you've got, a mortgage payment or a car payment, or you're in debt up to your eyeballs, which is why you go back and you think about it just for a second. And you go, about 40 years ago, they stopped giving wage increases. One, because they were attacking your ability to collectively bargain, but also they were really pulling back those gains of the 50s and 60s. And instead of giving wage increases, they gave easier credit. So we put women into the workforce. We get both parents working. I grew up as a latchkey kid, which was something. And nowadays, I'm kind of confused how two parents working get along, but okay. We did that, and we stopped giving wage increases, but we gave easy, cheap credit, and we got people into deep, deep hock. And that played the role of two things. One, we were okay with the wage cuts. We didn't really get upset by it. We were still standard of living okay. But secondly, we were put in a position where we can't stop working. We can't fold our arms, because you have to understand, the only power a worker in this country or anywhere has is the right to fold their arms, the right to say, not doing it. I go back and I look at that company in Malvern, that America Futures company, which you just kind of got to love the name of it. I wouldn't take that kind of a job. And just like I didn't take the job that Aldi's had offered back in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, where we're only going to pay you when the truck is against the dock. All the rest of the time is your own. Wouldn't take it. But when you're desperate, you don't have a choice, right? And I look at this, and we're heading towards scary times. And Monday, that decision will be huge. But if it goes the wrong way, do we end up with a more militant workforce? And that's something that's kind of worrisome. And one of those cautionary things that, the corporatists had better consider. There's one thing about stuff in my pockets today, but what about tomorrow when your head's on a stick? Just kind of a thought. I know I got to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk with our good friend Isaiah Poole from the Campaign for America's Future. Stick around. Right back after this.
Disorder in the house. There's a flaw in the system, and the fly in the ointment's gonna bring the whole thing down. The floodgates are open. We've let the demons loose. The big guns have spoken, and we've fallen for the ruse.
And they have protected many thousands of houses from floods, but they don't always do enough.
Britain's new flood defenses already overwhelmed.
That is due to climate change.
Climate change turbocharging record El Nino extreme weather. State of emergency for Flint, Michigan water crisis. Plus, TransCanada sues Obama over Keystone XL pipeline rejection.
All of that rejection and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comments.
The entire scientific community has concluded that climate change is real, causing major problems, and Trump believes that it's a hoax created by the Chinese.
Oh, as if it isn't, Bernie Sanders. This is your Green News Report.
Surprised it wasn't the Mexicans. Usually.
Okay, Desi Doyen, it's our first Green News report of the new year.
Yep.
So you better make it good. Now, I understand that we've just got data from NOAA finding that 2015 was the second warmest year on record for the U.S.
Yep, that's right.
So when we had this really, really cold winter last year in the Northeast, even with that, it was still the second warmest year on record in the U.S., and we're still waiting for the global numbers. And I think 2015 will have been the warmest year on record for the globe, but we'll find out. What else do you have for us to start the year, Desi Doyen?
Canadian company TransCanada has filed suit against the Obama administration, seeking $15 billion in damages over the rejection of the Keystone XL pipeline, calling it arbitrary, unjustified, and a breach of the NAFTA trade agreement. This type of legal action, a corporation seeking to overturn a nation's policies using international free trade agreements, is exactly what critics have been warning will happen with the proposed Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, free trade agreement.
So TransCanada has gone to federal court and filed a complaint, but they've also filed a separate complaint under this extrajudicial process that takes place under NAFTA. That is just the thing that critics of TPP have been warning and complaining about, and especially environmentalists.
In Michigan, Republican Governor Rick Snyder has declared a state of emergency for the city of Flint to speed up resources to deal with widespread lead contamination in the drinking water supply. The U.S. Attorney's Office is now investigating why state officials told residents for months that the contaminated water was safe to drink when it was most definitely not.
Snyder's administration knew about this. He allowed the lead poisoning to go on. I think this may cost Rick Snyder his office. If it doesn't, it should.
In California, Governor Jerry Brown has declared a state of emergency, ordering California agencies to move more quickly to resolve an ongoing massive natural gas leak at a storage facility near Los Angeles that has forced evacuations of over 2,000 nearby residents. Southern California Gas Company admitted last week that its ruptured well does not have a type of deep safety valve that might have stopped the leak because it wasn't required by law. The U.S. Department of Justice has filed civil charges against German automaker Volkswagen for violating the Clean Air Act after Volkswagen admitted it used secret software to cheat U.S. emissions regulations in over 500,000 diesel cars sold in the U.S.
And what kind of fines are they facing if they're found guilty of this?
Maximum potential of $48 billion with a B.
Ain't enough.
Britain just had its wettest December in history, and likely will for January too, with a relentless string of multiple storms bringing record flooding to northern England, which has already overwhelmed new billion-dollar flood defenses that were installed after disastrous flooding just a few years ago. Critics say Conservative Prime Minister David Cameron didn't spend enough. He defended his policies on the BBC.
After any one of these events, it's right to sit down and look at what you've spent, what you've built, look at what you're planning to spend, look at what you're planning to build, and work out, is it in the right places? Are we doing it the right way? Do we need to do more? And we'll ask all those questions.
And you need to ask, did you do it soon enough? I don't think any of us are prepared for what's coming, and I think the massive deaths, not just here in the U.S., but all around the globe over the holidays, underscores that once again.
And speaking of that extreme weather over the holidays, meteorologists and climate scientists say El Nino is partly to blame for that extreme weather. Record-breaking heat in December that fueled extreme weather that killed nearly 70 people. Deadly tornadoes in the southwest and the southeast, including one that narrowly missed my own sister. And, of course, the torrential rains and ongoing deadly flooding in Missouri and Illinois. However, according to climate scientist Michael Mann on MSNBC, climate change is also a major contributor.
Part of it is due to El Nino, but the fact that this is the strongest El Nino we have ever seen during what just finished up as the warmest year we have ever seen, that is due to climate change.
The mainstream media will cover El Nino, but they won't talk about how it is supercharged by climate change. Your sister doing okay?
She's fine.
I know that tornado missed her house by about 4 houses. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us and follow us on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Here you come again. And here I go. Here I go. so bad. Everybody seems to nag me. Coming Tuesday, I feel better. Even my old man looks good. This Wednesdays go so slow. Thursday, I don't know. I got money on my mind.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. This coming weekend, the Republicans going to have their big poverty, we care about poverty show. I guess it is the forum called Expanding Opportunity, organized by the Jack Kemp Foundation. We're going to... Republicans really talking about how much they care about the poor. How disingenuous can you get? But this expanding opportunity stuff, nothing new. Goes back to several years now with all the expanding opportunities initiatives, much like we had here in Pennsylvania, where our General Assembly played poor for an hour. And I loved the pictures from their poordom of them laughing and giggling about how they couldn't get on the bus to get across the room. And it was really just a show of sickening proportions. But here to talk a little bit about it, our good friend Isaiah Poole, online director there at the Campaign for America's Future, ourfuture.org, the website. Isaiah, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, absolutely, my pleasure.
So big forum this weekend on expanding opportunity for those there poor folk.
Yeah, the big star of the show is going to be now House Speaker Paul Ryan. 6 of the presidential candidates, including Jeb Bush, Chris Christie, John Kasich, Carly Fiorina, are going to be there. And as you said before, we've seen this before. Every few years, there's, someone in the Republican Party will try to send a message that says, well, Republicans really don't hate poor people, and in fact do want to see poor people rise out of poverty. We just have a different way of thinking about that than Democrats do, but it always seems to end up devolving into the same old, same old. Jack Kemp was a Congressman who actually I covered as a young reporter back in the late 70s and 1980s. And he came up to, one of the neighborhoods he came up to was Kenilworth Parkside, which is very close to an area I grew up in here in Washington, D.C. And he tried to, he went into that neighborhood, talked to tenant activists, hooked up with a guy named Robert Woodson, who is now a nationally known Black conservative, and tried to promote things like tenant ownership and other sorts of things. There was a mix of good things and bad things.
Right.
Enterprise zones came out of that, and the idea that if you lower tax rates in depressed communities, that would attract business into those communities and create jobs in those communities, and that would be a way to revitalize neighborhoods. That idea got bipartisan support, but the interesting thing about the enterprise zones is that then some smart conservatives said, well, why not make the entire country an enterprise zone? And hence the race to the bottom that we have now in terms of corporate taxation. So we've been through this before.
Yeah, and
Kenilworth Parkside, by the way, is about as bad now as, well, it's some changes have been made, some improvements have been made, but they certainly are not traceable to the stuff that Kemp tried to do back in the 80s.
I mean, at the end of it, it comes down to poverty. You have to deal with the issue of poverty. That's it. I mean,
and the way to get out of poverty, by the way, is to have more money. And
I mean, that sounds really stupid to say. I know, because you go, duh, but I don't think people quite get it. I mean, they say, well, you can't throw money at a problem. Yes, you can. You can help people. You can lift their standard of living. You can help them put food on the table. And I look at Jeb Bush's proposal, and I'm sure you've seen this. One of his ideas is to do away with the SNAP program. Let's just do away with the food stamps completely. Do away with it. Hungry people will work harder, Isaiah.
It's stunning. You know, the SNAP program is one of the few things, or the few tools that the federal government has left that actually kicks in during a recession. In other words, that as more people lose their jobs and lose the ability to work, then SNAP then enables those people to have food on the table while they're getting a job. And you want to take that away from people. Ryan's plan is to fold SNAP and rental assistance and the other programs that are now called entitlements, and fold those into a block grant and hand them to the states. Well, there's a lot of great studies that have been done. There's in fact, a huge amount of information that's been pulled together by the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities that who has looked at this extensively. The Center for Law and Social Policy has, and the people at the talkpoverty.org, which is an offshoot of the Center for American Progress, that has been actually talking to poor people in South Carolina and other places around the country. They all say the same thing.
Right.
When you block grant these programs and you kick them over to states that have very conservative governors and very conservative state legislatures, what happens is that the cash assistance goes down and the money gets diverted. Often gets diverted away from programs that actually help low-income people. Some of this money has just been used to close budget gaps.
Exactly. And that's one of my big problems against any of this block grant stuff. I mean, am I going to give a huge pile of money to Paul LePage up in Maine and expect him to take care of hungry people in his state? A guy who admitted as a kid, Isaiah, a guy who admitted that, and was quite gleeful of the fact that he used to hide in the alley and beat up younger and smaller kids for their candy at Halloween and thought that was funny and a joke.
And then he wants to talk about how, you know, there are rappers coming into Maine and impregnating white women, but that's not a racial issue. That rappers, and we know who those look like.
There's one white rapper. Come on.
But I digress. It's you know, the bottom line on this.
No, but to your point, hold on a second, Isaiah, but to your point is, and I think you're right, that plays into a racial stereotype where most people think that anyone collecting food stamps are poor black people, when the reality is overwhelmingly the larger number of people are poor white people, because there are a lot more poor white people in this country.
And the overwhelming majority of both the poor black people and the poor white people are actually people who who all they need is a hand up. While they're, you know, they lost a job. Maybe they made a bad choice. You know, maybe
being born into one of those poor families is really a bad choice.
Yeah, but the point is that, okay, so everybody makes a mistake in life. Even if you make a mistake in life, you know, what you need is a hand up, and you say, okay, I'm going to turn my life around. I need some help to get me over the hump. I need not just food on my table, but I need bus fare to look for work. And one of the things I point to, by the way, with regard to bus fare, is the wonderful story in the Washington Post, which gets at something that's been bothering me for a long time, which is that when we don't invest in things like public transportation, we make it hard for poor people who are being displaced right now from center cities like Atlanta and Washington D.C. and cities. San Francisco is a real problem.
No, right.
Where low-income people are literally being pushed out into the suburbs, where there's no there's insufficient public transportation. A lot of these streets don't even have sidewalks because they were built in the 1950s and 1960s, where everybody thought everybody was going to have a car. And now you have low-income people in these neighborhoods because that's all they can afford. And it is extraordinarily difficult for them to get to a job interview. It's very difficult for them to get to a library where they can get onto a computer and look for jobs and load a resume.
Yeah, you mentioned bus fare, and immediately my thought went, the heck with bus fare. What if you're not on the bus line? I grew up in a housing project on the west side of Cleveland. We weren't on the bus line. You had to walk at least 2.5 miles to get to the bus line, and that's ridiculous. And it's ridiculous.
So the conversation, it would be great if what you had at a summit like this was actual poor people talking about what they need in order to survive, and how the demolition of the safety net, because if you look at some of the statistics, particularly in the South, or frankly even in Pennsylvania, I was just looking where the amount of money, the percentage of money devoted to basic assistance, cash assistance, has gone down 6 percentage points in the last 15 years.
Well, that's because of the 4 Corbett years we just had.
Exactly. But if you had poor people actually talking about the devastation that's been done to the safety net, that would be a useful conversation.
I'm with you. But here's the thing, Isaiah, and this is one of the things I've been saying for a number of years. I remember times as a kid being on and off of welfare, ADC at the time, aided dependent children. We used to get food stamps. They used to give you these clownish looking, I don't call them money. They were these clownish looking coupons that you had to take to the store. And of course, the cashier behind the thing, you made a scene about you taking them to embarrass and humiliate and all of that stuff. And I always thought it was the worst possible thing. But my mother had lost her job, and she was a single parent. So to put food on my table, she had to swallow her pride and do away with this. I always believed that was the worst system possible. And I'm not a fan of handouts. And I think A. Philip Randolph, the black labor leader from the 30s, 40s, 50s into the 70s, was against handout programs as well. What I think has to happen are jobs programs. So we stop dividing people. There should never, in my view, be a handout program. Anything that you could say is, we're giving you something for not doing something. And to me, that's where I think a more constructive conversation could be. How do we make government the employer of last resort if the private sector refuses to do it?
Right. Unfortunately, it's hard to even have that conversation with people who believe that, the way you employ people is to pay them as little as possible. Which is the other problem. You have, particularly in a lot of these southern states which are right to work, and the minimum wage is only $7.25, and the only kinds of jobs that are being created are essentially minimum wage and slightly above jobs.
But don't you think this would be an opportunity if you did make government the employer of last resort? That you would then have that competition for better wages, and you would force the private sector into paying higher wages?
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, we saw in the jobs report today, in fact, that, we had, we did this, 290 something thousand jobs. It was a huge number. We've had this phenomenal job growth compared to what we had.
And wages went down a penny.
But what we have not seen is the kind of upward pressure on wages that we really, really need to see. And we're not going to see that until we push that unemployment rate down closer to 4%. And my fear is that, with the Federal Reserve putting on the brakes and with Congress refusing to consider anything remotely resembling government employment as a last resort, we're not going to get down to that point where we really get the upward wage pressure. And it's tragic because there's so much work that needs to be done in this country. And we certainly have the money and the resources. All we need to do is go after it. We know where the money is. We know who has the money. We know who's who's doing the tax evasion schemes. Shut that stuff down, use that money, pour it back into this country, employ the people who are still looking for work and who are standing on the sidelines. And we can make America awesome. That's my slogan, by the way.
Make America awesome. I like it.
Yeah.
I like it. Now, I'm sure the Trump supporters would beat you over the head, but I still like it anyway. Because here's the thing. I mean, how do you get a stage full of Republicans to talk about poverty and it not be a mockery? Because everything that seems that these folks are, and I don't like taking this position. I looked at when the fake news on Fox people were saying that Obama talking about the gun issue, that he must have put onions in his eyes or hot peppers or something to make him cry. I hate the fact that I question their humanity in their caring for the poor, but their policies, what they do and what they pursue, leads me to no other conclusion.
And that is unfortunate. Because I think there was a time when you could have a decent conversation with people in a particular wing of the Republican Party. This conversation was in fact beginning to happen. And actually, I think Jack Kemp was one of these people. I never questioned his sincerity. I question, particularly in retrospect, some of his proposals. But I think in terms of his sincerity, I think it was quite genuine. I think he really wanted the Republican Party to be a party that had more of was represented more than just the wealthy, that represented everybody and showed that it could raise everyone up equally.
And finally, I understand this Saturday you guys are going to be participating in a Iowa's People's Presidential Forum.
Yes, that's the alternative. Okay, there's the other side of the story. The National People's Action and a group of Iowa citizens party is going to have a presidential forum featuring Martin O'Malley and Bernie Sanders. And I don't know if it's impossible at this point for Hillary Clinton to be a part of it, but I'm sure that if Hillary Clinton jumped in,
they'd pull up a chair for her.
Absolutely welcome.
Yeah, they'd pull up a chair for her.
Well, we would pull up a chair for her. And that is where I think that's where the real discussion is going to happen, actually, about what some real solutions for poverty and real solutions for getting people back to work and for rebuilding the middle class. I think that's where the conversation that I'm going to be looking for.
Right. And if you want to take a look at it on Saturday, the website goodjobsforall.org, I guess they're going to have a live stream of the event. No, I don't think any networks are picking it up, but there'll be the opportunity. We'll make sure we get a link at thericksmithshow.com so folks can take a look at it and see for themselves. Isaiah, I appreciate you taking time for us. Great stuff on poverty. I look forward to talking to you again next week.
Absolutely.
Great talking to you. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
With marijuana prohibition finally ending in states and cities across the land, including full legalization and/or commercialization in Alaska, Colorado, Washington State, Oregon, and Washington, D.C., Who better than our friend Willie Nelson to lead the way for weed quality and social responsibility? The iconic musician and intrepid fighter for justice has announced that he will market his own marijuana brand, Willie's Reserve, and open a group of stores selling top-quality pot and paraphernalia. I feel like I was buying so much of it, it's time to start selling it back, Willie said of his new weed venture. I'm looking forward to working with the best growers in Colorado and Washington to make sure our product is the best on the market. A tireless champion of small farmers, civil liberties, the environment, common sense, and the common good, he plans to start rolling out his stores and products, including hemp goods, this year. And he'll expand further as state laws allow. In the typical Willie way, the stores will be, quote, the anti-Walmart model, with a core purpose of helping expand the market for small, energy-efficient, environmentally sound growers. Over the years, I've cited Willie's work in calling for legalization and restoration of hemp farming in America. I've also called repeatedly for an end to the Orwellian Kafkaesque drug war that has criminalized the cannabis equivalent of cocktail hour. 750,000 people are arrested each year for marijuana-related offenses. This is Jim Hightower saying, and now I salute the innumerable grassroots activists who've steadily pushed America from the darkness of marijuana madness to being able to light up a willie without getting busted. Find out more at Marijuana Policy Project, MPP.org, and also at normal, NORML.org. That's normal, NORML.org.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's populist take on what the powers that be are up to. Find out more at hightowerlowdown.org.
The animals, trap, trap, trap till the cages fall. The cages fall, stay away in the dark, count mistakes. The light was off.
Sanity for a change. The Rick Smith Show.
The day is new, and everyone is waiting on you and you.
So the Gates Foundation, in 2014, they actually made money off of their investment. You gotta love that, I guess. The group that is doing an awful lot to destroy public education in the U.S. Look, they do good work on AIDS in Africa, and they do some good things. Not putting them down. The reality is Gates gave out $5 billion in 2014, and it actually grew by $7.4 billion. So I guess good for them. Now here's the thing that gets me. We hear an awful lot. You hear the Donald Trump saying, Bernie Sanders wants to tax you at 90%. And you hear the right wing say that, we shouldn't have welfare or social programs because the philanthropic, wonderful, benevolent people in the wealth class will take care of you. They're going to fund charities. They're going to do all that stuff. What's interesting to me is this guy named John Bakja of Williams College has done some research that points out that tax rates were considerably higher. And this makes perfect sense. Understand this. There is nothing here that common sense won't tell you, but they point out that back in the 1970s, people gave twice as much, the wealthy in this country gave twice as much to charity at a time when the top tax rate was 70% than they did in 2007 when the tax rate was 35%. Now think about it. They gave twice as much when the tax rate was twice as high. And why would they do that? Tax dodge. Now we've given them a rate in half and all kinds of tax dodges. Why would they give more? So this idea of benevolency and when there's ideas that they care, kind of nonsense. And real quick to the Jeb Bush thing, doing away with the SNAP program and all that, because we want block grants. It kind of reminds me of every year during the Bush years, the supplemental nutrition program that Bush took out of every budget that he proposed. Now, understand that particular program was to give low-income seniors fresh vegetables. And there is actually a government program for that because we understand from a medical perspective that this is good for them, keeps them healthy. And you know what it does? Keeps Medicare costs a little bit down. So heaven forbid that we think proactively. Heaven forbid that we think about, one, helping people, but two, saving on medical costs. Just kind of thought. But I'm looking forward to the big debate this weekend. I can't wait to see the Jack Kemp thing. That should be quite the entertaining day. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, talk about guns. Yes, Charlton Heston on the mountain with my cold dead hands, or at least the beer in the hotel with the hooker, or the high-priced restaurant there in Oregon. I don't know. Right back. Stick around.
Remember all their faces. Remember all their voices. Everything is different the second time around.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. The National Labor Relations Board's General Counsel has issued a series of consolidated complaints against McDonald's and its franchisees that accuse the fast food giant of violating workers' rights. As the Fight for 15 works to organize to get better pay and union rights at McDonald's, the NLRB is treating McDonald's as a joint employer, meaning the corporation, and not just individual franchise stores, is responsible for these labor law violations. Attorney David Dean represents fast food workers.
It's just common sense that McDonald's should be held accountable for the rights of workers at its franchise stores. Unlike some other franchisors, McDonald's requires its franchisees to use a McDonald's system that, in order to maximize sales, and that means revenue to McDonald's, prescribes every detail of production, service, staffing, and positioning within its mandated layout. McDonald's is the boss. It shouldn't be hiding behind the franchisees.
In 2014, the Labor Board's General Counsel issued a finding that McDonald's is a joint employer with its franchisees. That holds the corporation accountable for working conditions and means they have to deal directly with workers organizing for union rights and higher pay. Kathleen Ruckelshaus of the National Employment Law Project says the fast food industry is not the only one increasingly using franchisee outsourcing to try to escape responsibility for workplace conditions. That makes joint employer rulings all the more important.
Without joint employer accountability for the franchisor or contracting company at the top, these types of corporate outsourcing can result in a lack of responsibility for workplace conditions. And the result is that workers often have no real remedy when they don't get the pay they're owed, or as here, when they are fired for exercising their protected rights.
TransCanada is demanding $15 billion from the U.S. for rejecting the Keystone XL oil pipeline. The Canadian corporation's claim is being made under the NAFTA Free Trade Agreement Investor State Tribunal. President Obama rejected the pipeline as not good for the nation or the environment. Global Trade Watch's Lori Wallach says this action is exactly the kind of attack on U.S. environmental policy that the president insisted could never happen under the controversial Investor State Corporate Tribunal trade agreement regimes. Wallach says the pending TPP trade deal would double this kind of liability, putting U.S. control over its own environmental policies at risk.
Workers Independent News is heard daily on The Rick Smith Show, live 3 to 6 p.m. coast to coast at thericksmithshow.com. The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
WIN is made possible in part by the National Association of Letter Carriers. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Okay, yeah, throw them out. Throw them out into the cold. You know, don't give them their coat. No coats. No coats. Confiscate their coat. You know, you can't win. By the way, just to finish, I had one word left, Iraq.
I'm out in the cold.
My favorite part of that clip, to be honest, is not, Trump going, take their coats, because you expect that from the rich guy, don't you? You expect that kind of nonsense to come out of his mouth. It's the uproarious cheer that comes from the crowd when Trump orders them to take the coat. I mean, that's what scares me. And, you look at the rise of Trump and really this kind of really just extremism and this kind of intolerance and this really scary nonsense. Look at what's going on in Oregon. I think that's an outcrop of all of this vitriol and all of this chest thumping and all of this exceptionalist thinking, which is why I've asked our good friend John Neurohr to come talk with us a little bit. He's a political consultant out there in Western Pennsylvania and an overall great guy. John, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, it's always good to talk to you, Rick.
So what do you think of this? You got Donald, who I kind of expect that to come out of his mouth. The heck with them, beat him up, kick him, do whatever. I expect that from him, but to hear a crowd of people in Vermont, nonetheless, that's a little scary.
It's not just, and it wasn't just to be clear, it was a capacity crowd of 17,000 people that were at that rally, and apparently they're over capacity. There are more people that wanted to get in. It's frightening. He's, throughout this whole process, and we've talked about this before, I don't know how, whereas a number of his competitors for the Republican nomination honestly do believe it. I think that's pretty clear. I'm not quite sure how much Donald Trump, believes in what he's saying as much as he is a smart, savvy businessman, a smart, savvy person in general, and he's taking advantage of already existing sentiments out there. He's the kind of guy that sticks his finger, up in the air, or maybe sticks his hair up in the air, his hairpiece in the air to see which way the wind's blowing, and follows that in a smart and tactical way.
Yeah, I mean,
but it is still frightening because the point of all that is he's tapping into something that is already existing out there. The other candidates are trying to do the same thing, and it doesn't really. I wonder. You think about it from the perspective of an outsider, somebody from outside the country watching our, the presidential election play out, to see this kind of vitriol and to see all those people cheering and, the many examples of xenophobia and frankly racist comments that have come from a number of the Republican presidential candidates, not just Donald Trump, and to see what kind of support they're getting for that it paints a really, really disturbing picture of America.
It's interesting that you bring that up because over my vacation, we were in South Florida, and I talked to people because the great thing about South Florida is people from all over the world come there to vacation. And I talked to a guy from Brazil, someone from Argentina, a couple of people from Canada, some folks from Russia, and they're all looking at our political campaign right now going, is this your system, or is this just bad reality TV? And, all of them are going, look, our countries have our problems, but you were supposed to be the stable ones. What's going on?
Well, I think that I still believe strongly at this point that in the end, and I think that a lot of folks in the Republican establishment are really concerned about this also, that in the end, they paint themselves into a corner with this. They're trying to out-Trump Donald Trump from Iowa to New Hampshire to South Carolina, Nevada. And what's going to happen is you get to a general election, you're having a conversation with a much different audience.
Right.
You're trying to appeal to a much different kind of demographic, what a general election audience would want to hear. And so these extreme statements, the 7,000, well, that is a large number, people who are in those seats in that arena in Vermont this week are not, thankfully, representative of the general election audience, much less the larger, the country at large. Thank goodness. So I still think this is going to be a long-term problem, but it is quite a spectacle to behold in the meantime.
Yeah, but Vermont is not a big state. There are only about 630,000 people there. So 17,000 is a pretty big percentage. But here's the thing, and this is what gets me is, the people were gleeful at the kind of cruelty that was throw them out in the cold, take their coats, and it just, that kind of pack mentality is kind of frightening.
Yeah, there's no question that, and we've seen that from, this is particularly something that's been happening at Trump rallies, and maybe it's because of the visibility of the Trump rallies. Maybe it's because all the cameras are always on at Trump rallies, but you have supporters who are attacking protesters, and anybody who's not pledging allegiance to Donald Trump is apparently not getting into rallies anymore. So maybe we'll see that less. But the groupthink is scary. It's not. But this is not necessarily anything that's new. I mean, think back to 2008. Think back to Sarah Palin rallies. Think back to some of the crowds that we saw across the country, saying the most ridiculous things about an African-American presidential nominee. This is not new.
Yeah.
This is some of the same people that are showing up to these rallies. But the problem is that when you give those kinds of folks a space to legitimize, some of the disgusting, some of this disgusting mentality, that's the problem. You're giving them a space where they can feel like it's okay to be racist.
Right.
It's
But here's the thing.
To not care about other people.
Yeah, but here's the thing, John. I look at this, and while I don't believe a lot of the things that come out of Trump's mouth, I think he's doing just to incite, to get attention. That reality star mentality of there's no such thing as bad publicity. So you just say the most outrageous things to get your name spoken time and time and time again. What I think it's doing outside of that is it's giving those folks who are at the fringes, who are, I got to question their sanity on some level. I mean, I look at what's going on out in Oregon. I think a lot of this vitriol, a lot of this rhetoric has empowered these kind of crazy far out groups to some sort of really extreme action. I mean, taking over someplace in the middle of nowhere in Oregon, 10 years ago would have been, oh my God, incredible. Now we just go, leave them. I'm with the mindset, just leave them alone.
Well, I think that's right. And, I think part of the problem with the situation in Oregon specifically is that all the cameras are on. MSNBC knows that people are interested in this and it gets ratings, but, they're doing live shots from there every single night. So in that respect, I think you're right. Leave them alone with this situation in Oregon, and it goes away. But I think that there is certainly a parallel, like you alluded to legitimizing people's extremism. So you have the Bundys, who are the ones that are doing the occupying out in this wildlife refuge in Oregon, protesting a situation where a couple of other ranchers were arrested. There's mandatory minimum sentence for what they did. They are charged and convicted of arson. They lit a fire because they were hunting illegally on federal lands. So they committed a crime. They were charged. They were found guilty. You pay the price. But the problem is that the Bundys take over this wildlife refuge after protesting for a few days out in Oregon, and basically they put out the call to arms to other extremists, other militants across the country. It's a very open-ended ask. So hey, are you angry about the government, and are you pro Second Amendment, and come out and join us? We're going to take over this wildlife refuge. It's not a very specific protest in that regard. So you're legitimizing all kinds of extremists across the country. Come on, we're all going to bunk together at this wildlife refuge. So you have extremists who are in hiding in other places who say, hey, this is okay. Well, the way that I feel is legit, and I'm going to bring all my assault weapons out to Oregon, and we're going to be one big happy, federal government protesting family. And that's really, really a dangerous situation.
I'm of the mindset, let them call them all out, let them take them all move them from Pennsylvania, from Michigan, send them all out there and then fence them all in. And then what we can do is put cameras all around and watch the fun begin. Throw a bunch of alcohol, some drugs in there and let them go at it. Because eventually they're going to get bored and they're going to end up doing thin the herd. Just kind of a thought.
It's definitely not, it is not very well organized, but to watch it play out is very frustrating. And I think it's frustrating for a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. But you have I think on one hand, you're right, leave them alone. What they actually want is some kind of conflict.
Sure, because they want to be martyrs.
The conflict would be the victory for them. But on the other hand, I think that you certainly can understand the perspective of other people who are frustrated because they feel like if the protesters looked different, if the protesters were Native Americans, if the protesters were African American, that the way that this would play out would be much different. The way that the authorities would look at them as a threat and then think through how they take care of that threat would play out much differently. We know that that's true. I mean, frankly, you think about Native Americans, they have a much better claim to say, hey, we'd like you to give back this land that you own now that was ours, than the local ranchers who, the state never owned that land. They want the land to go back to the state. The state didn't own that land. That was always federal land. So it is frustrating to see how this is playing out. It's affecting the local community, which I think is often lost in the shuffle. People are afraid. People live there. People go to school there. The schools have been closed for a long time now because of this. It's affecting a lot of people, and it's frustrating. But on the other hand, I do still think that you're right. If we leave them alone, turn off the cameras, and go away, that they're not going to get what they want.
Yes, because I look at it as, I would think the local community would be thrilled. There's a little amosexual tourism going on.
Well, the one thing that I did see, which I think was yesterday, which this sounds utterly ridiculous, that the authorities let them free passage from the wildlife refuge to town to dine at some really, really nice restaurant. And then free passage back to the wildlife refuge. So at least that one restaurant in town, had a couple more tables of people on a Thursday night than they otherwise would.
Yeah,
so
and the local motel,
the
local motel, I understand, had a couple people in there who were taking donation money and drinking it up and all kinds of stuff like that. And look, I guess you're going to get that, with this kind of a group, along with the Valor Thieves, because I guess there've been a couple of those, right?
Yeah. I think, the other thing that to think about though, which I think would be interesting to hear what you think about this. Their main gripe is, like I said, that they want the federal government to give back, chunks of the land that the federal government owns. And in a lot of these Western states, they own a lot of land,
right?
A good portion of land, and some of that is because of the National Park Service owns it or whatever. But still, they want the federal government to give back, to make public land private land. But let's, if you really want to have a conversation about what happens when you make public land private land, I mean, who's going to swoop in there and take that land? What's actually going to happen? You think that these small town ranchers are going to be the ones that will end up owning this land? Right now they are paying a small fee to the federal government to let their cattle graze on that land, for example. You think of a private, comes in there, swoops in there, buys a bunch of land. You think that they're going to give them the same kinds of discounts the federal government does to use that land? I mean, I think they should think through what they actually want to have happen here.
Well, they want this libertarian ideal that, for them, everything should be free. But for the rest of us, you stay off my property. It's really kind of twisted thinking. But, I guess when you inundate yourself with that kind of thought, that's where you end up, man.
Yeah, and that's the same thing that if you remember, Clive and Bundy, who was the Nevada rancher who owed upwards of $1 million to the federal government and refused to pay it for letting his cattle destroy federal land. And it's his sons who are out there leading the charge in Oregon. Well, if you remember, the one thing that made a lot of the Republican presidential candidates run as fast as they could away from their support of Clive and Bundy was, once the camera showed up there in Nevada, he started talking about, just sort of out of nowhere, all of the African Americans on the federal dime, and were they better off when they were slaves, or are they better off when they're, sucking on the teat of big government or whatever? And by the way, not using African American as I did there. So yeah, when at the same time he's asking for handouts from the federal government, it's utterly ridiculous.
Defies logic. Last question I've got for you, because I got to be honest, I look at that Oregon thing, and to me, honestly, I think it's just the filming of a bad reality TV series. Honestly, I think that's what this is. I think all of these people are looking for their 5 minutes of fame. I'm thinking, much like the Moonshining reality show where they film it like 2 or 3 years earlier and then they play it so that they don't get any legal trouble. I see this kind of in the same vein. This is just a bad reality show.
There's a lot of foresight that goes into trying something like that. I mean, it reminds me of this idea of sort of that Sarah Palin was never really serious about, wanting to be vice president or president, that she wanted to be able to just up her profile and make tons of money, and she did. And you have, Dr. Ben Carson. A lot of people don't think that he's very interested in being president either, but he's selling a ton of books right now. There's a lot of foresight that's involved in that, and I think the vast majority of the folks who are out there in Oregon leading this effort, I'm not quite sure they have the capacity for that kind of foresight, but one way or the other, I do think you're right. It probably will pay off for them, and that says as much about America as the people who were at the Trump rally last night.
But here again, you go back to this, and the tools never have the capacity to think this stuff through, but somebody does.
Sure.
Because the guy who knows how to do that is not standing on the ground wanting to be a martyr. He's in the background going, go ahead, stupid. You go stand out there and do it.
They do have lawyers and advisors, for sure, and they are smart enough to have the foresight.
Kind of my thought. John, I appreciate the time, man. Thanks so much.
Hey, thanks as always, Rick.
Great talking with you, John Neurohr. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1939. That was the day a new radio show began on CBS Radio.
Welcome to the Motion Picture Star's own radio program, The Gulf Screen Guild Show. With Jack Bentley, Joan Crawford, Reginald Gardner.
The show featured some of the biggest names in Hollywood. All of the actors' fees were donated to the Motion Picture Relief Fund. The fund was started in 1922 with the motto of taking care of our own. Proceeds from the show went to support the Motion Picture Country Home for retired workers in the film industry. These included actors, cameramen, set designers, and even security guards. These retired workers only paid what they could afford to live there. Eventually, the retirement home allowed working people from the television industry as well. Gulf Oil sponsored the program for its first 3 seasons. It was called the Gulf Screen Guild Show. Over the years, the show took on several other sponsors and names. It also migrated to NBC, then to ABC, and then back to CBS Radio. In all, it ran for 14 seasons and more than 500 episodes. In its early years, the show was a variety review. It included songs along with dramatic and comedy sketches. Later, the show recreated films for the radio audience. It was a challenge to get a whole film down to just 22 minutes. Films covered by the show included classics such as Casablanca, Arsenic and Old Lace, and Pinocchio. But despite the changes and challenges, the show raised $800,000 for the retirement home by 1942. The retirement home was almost closed in 2009, but continues operations. Workers in many industries have long found creative and collaborative ways to support each other and to truly take care of their own. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Tales of American Political History with Clinton Porter Hackney.
We've been discussing the signers of the Declaration of Independence, including interesting facts and their steely courage. John Hancock was president of this Continental Congress that adopted the Declaration, and it's presumed that he signed first. His large, flamboyant signature became iconic. One account of his signing that speaks to their courage has it that he held it up and said, "There, I guess King George will be able to read that." And another story of the same vein has it that once the signing was done, Hancock said, "Now we must all hang together." And Ben Franklin quickly replied, "Yes, we must indeed all hang together, or most assuredly, we shall hang separately." No matter what each of these men did before or after signing the document, and whether they sought it or not, the actual signing of the Declaration of Independence ensured all of them instant immortality. This is Clinton Porter Hackney at cphackney.com.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. Have you been following this case in Fort Worth, Texas? This crazy mother decides she's going to take her son, who violated his probation by going to a party with alcohol. They go to, I guess, somewhere in Mexico, and they're on the run. And I see this headline, and I guess it wouldn't be too much of a big deal if it weren't for how this kid didn't go to jail for killing 4 people and injuring like 15 or 16 or 17 others. His defense was this affluenza defense. And I got to be honest, I had never heard of it before, not into the psychology world, which, I'm struggling with. I mean, have you ever heard of this, Samantha? This idea of affluenza as a disease or a psychosis or something?
Sounds like something out of a really warped Law and Order episode of some sort.
It's kind of ridiculous in that as I understand this, and correct me if I'm wrong, that because this kid grew up rich, because this kid's parents had money, because they were affluent, that he didn't know right from wrong. So the idea of getting drunk and driving a giant SUV and crashing into someone, he didn't really understand that was wrong. Am I getting this right?
I guess, but it just doesn't sound like something that, exists in this world. But I guess now it does. Doesn't quite make a whole lot of sense, actually.
But, I look at this and, when I was a kid, you learned right from wrong. You did things. Your mom smacked you on the back of the head. The part of this that's kind of frustrating is the kid got out of this, got out of killing 4 people, did not do jail time, and got out of this with this defense that, look, if he's a poor kid, you don't come up with an attorney and experts and witness. You don't come up with all of this stuff to keep your sorry, bitter little behind out of jail. But because of the wealth, because of their status, this kid evades going to jail for killing people. And then he deliberately violates the probation to keep him out of jail. And then they take him. The father impersonates a police officer so he can get out of Dodge. And the mother takes him out of the country to evade going to jail.
You're also forgetting the farewell party that they threw before they went away. Actually, a little sayonara. A nice little vacation in Mexico as you flee probation.
Now, here's my thought on this. And, if I'm the prosecutor in Fort Worth, because I actually thought about this over vacation, I leave the kid there because I don't know that they've extradited him back to the U.S. yet. I'm not 100% sure. I know she's come back, but I don't think he has. I would leave him there. I would leave him in a Mexican jail. I would pay the Mexicans to put him in one of their jails and tell him, stay as long as you want. If you want to come back, you got to walk across the border.
This is like some warped Donald Trump exchange program that we have going right now. Really.
But, I look at this and, this gave me the opportunity to talk to my kids, though. I mean, this was I do this to my children. And maybe it happened when you were a kid too, but I do this when you see something stupid like this happen. You go, you see this, kids? I'll never do this for you. If you get drunk and you drive an SUV and kill people, you better figure out how to get yourself out of it, because I'm not becoming a criminal and flying you out of the country. It's not happening. And I think that's where the majority of people are, that, you want your kids not to, be punished, but if they really screw up, and you want them held accountable, no?
One would think. I mean, that's the idea of learning the lesson here, right? I mean, you murder people, there should be a consequence for that. But apparently, I don't know, does it depend on who you're murdering or who's the murderer?
That's a good point. But I mean, at the end of this, and I guess what does this say about our society? Now, I read an article, and I think it was in either the Washington Post or the New York Times, where they were defending this affluenza defense. And actually saying that it's a real thing, that, these rich kids grow up without a sense of reality, and they've always had everything. They've never had to work for anything. It's the poor little rich kid thing. They're actually trying to make, this is why I do believe a lot of folks have no faith in pop psychology. There are some very real things that mentally and psychologically that I agree with, but this is not one of them. Not one of them.
I can see that. Absolutely. It seems like it's more of a disease in our criminal justice system than it could be, I think, more than just a mental disease that afflicts one person. I think the more truly damaging thing is the way in which we've allowed these kinds of pop psychology theories to come in and really just make a mockery of how we treat people in this country under the law.
Yeah, this kid's parents don't have money. He's sitting behind bars, because I got to be honest, I can't remember a story of someone getting drunk 3 times the legal limit, driving into a boatload of people, killing 4, injuring more than a dozen more, and not seeing time in jail. That's the part that blows my mind. Didn't have jail time. Just nuts. Anyway, thanks for your thoughts. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, a little bit of the news with Talk Radio News Service. Stick around. Right back after this.
And they have protected many thousands of houses from floods, but they don't always do enough.
Britain's new flood defenses already overwhelmed.
That is due to climate change.
Climate change turbocharging record El Nino extreme weather. State of emergency for Flint, Michigan water crisis. Plus, TransCanada sues Obama over Keystone XL pipeline rejection.
All of that rejection and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comments.
The entire scientific community has concluded that climate change is real, causing major problems, and Trump believes that it's a hoax created by the Chinese.
Oh, as if it isn't, Bernie Sanders. This is your Green News Report.
Surprised it wasn't the Mexicans. Usually.
Okay, Desi Doyen, it's our first Green News Report of the new year.
Yep.
So you better make it good. Now, I understand that we've just got data from NOAA, finding that 2015 was the second warmest year on record for the U.S.
Yep, that's right.
So when we had this really, really cold winter last year in the Northeast, even with that, it was still the second warmest year on record in the U.S., and we're still waiting for the global numbers. And I think 2015 will have been the warmest year on record for the globe, but we'll find out. What else do you have for us to start the year, Desi Doyen?
Canadian company TransCanada has filed suit against the Obama administration, seeking $15 billion in damages over the rejection of the Keystone XL pipeline, calling it arbitrary, unjustified, and a breach of the NAFTA trade agreement. This type of legal action, a corporation seeking to overturn a nation's policies using international free trade agreements, is exactly what critics have been warning will happen with the proposed Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, free trade agreement.
So TransCanada has gone to federal court and filed a complaint, but they've also filed a separate complaint under this extrajudicial process that takes place under NAFTA. That is just the thing that critics of TPP have been warning and complaining about, and especially environmentalists.
In Michigan, Republican Governor Rick Snyder has declared a state of emergency for the city of Flint to speed up resources to deal with widespread lead contamination in the drinking water supply. The U.S. Attorney's Office is now investigating why state officials told residents for months that the contaminated water was safe to drink when it was most definitely not.
Snyder's administration knew about this. He allowed the lead poisoning to go on. I think this may cost Rick Snyder his office. If it doesn't, it should.
In California, Governor Jerry Brown has declared a state of emergency, ordering California agencies to move more quickly to resolve an ongoing massive natural gas leak at a storage facility near Los Angeles that has forced evacuations of over 2,000 nearby residents. Southern California Gas Company admitted last week that its ruptured well does not have a type of deep safety valve that might have stopped the leak because it wasn't required by law. The U.S. Department of Justice has filed civil charges against German automaker Volkswagen for violating the Clean Air Act after Volkswagen admitted it used secret software to cheat U.S. emissions regulations in over 500,000 diesel cars sold in the U.S.
And what kind of fines are they facing if they're found guilty of this?
Maximum potential of $48 billion with a B.
Ain't enough.
Britain just had its wettest December in history, and likely will for January too, with a relentless string of multiple storms bringing record flooding to northern England, which has already overwhelmed new billion-dollar flood defenses that were installed after disastrous flooding just a few years ago. Critics say Conservative Prime Minister David Cameron didn't spend enough. He defended his policies on the BBC.
After any one of these events, it's right to sit down and look at what you've spent, what you've built, look at what you're planning to spend, look at what you're planning to build, and work out, is it in the right places? Are we doing it the right way? Do we need to do more? And we'll ask all those questions.
And you need to ask, did you do it soon enough? I don't think any of us are prepared for what's coming, and I think the massive deaths, not just here in the U.S., but all around the globe over the holidays, underscores that once again.
And speaking of that extreme weather over the holidays, meteorologists and climate scientists say El Nino is partly to blame for that extreme weather. Record-breaking heat in December that fueled extreme weather that killed nearly 70 people. Deadly tornadoes in the southwest and the southeast, including one that narrowly missed my own sister. And, of course, the torrential rains and ongoing deadly flooding in Missouri and Illinois. However, according to climate scientist Michael Mann on MSNBC, climate change is also a major contributor.
Part of it is due to El Nino, but the fact that this is the strongest El Nino we have ever seen during what just finished up as the warmest year we have ever seen, that is due to climate change.
The mainstream media will cover El Nino, but they won't talk about how it is supercharged by climate change. Your sister doing okay?
She's fine.
I know that tornado missed her house by about 4 houses. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us and follow us on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Here you come again. And here I go. Here I
The most important issues of the day. This is The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Well, I was at lunch earlier today, and remarkably, a guy walked by, could have swore it was Elvis Presley. Could have swore Elvis was in the building. And the reason I bring that up is, and I guess the reason this guy looking like Elvis was walking down the street is today's his birthday. And if he were still alive, and this guy obviously was, he'd be 81 years old. And I had a friend of mine, ticking off a bunch of his most popular songs. And I said, yeah, stolen. Never mind. Anyway, let's find out what's going on in Washington, D.C. and around the world. Justin Duckham, Talk Media News Service. Justin, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, great to be here. Sorry, how are you doing?
There he is. There's Elvis. Elvis is in the building.
Yeah, no, I have I got, I'm kind of a big Elvis guy. Back in my old punk rock band, I used to sort of dress like a demented, strung out, fat Elvis for a lot of our shows.
Nice.
So every Christmas I end up getting a lot of just kind of random Elvis junk. And so this year I got a singing penguin dressed as Elvis, a rubber ducky dressed as Elvis, as well as the fun Elvis glasses in the wig. So happy birthday to the king, I guess.
Yeah. One of my favorite groups back, one of those mock groups, Dred Zeppelin. Do you remember them?
Yep.
They did kind of a mock between Led Zeppelin and Elvis. Interesting times. Anyway, is he still alive, you think?
I don't think he's still alive. I think he probably died sometime in the 90s or whatnot, considering, his diet. But, I certainly don't believe the original story. That's just what they want you to believe.
That's what they want you to believe. That's right. All right, let's move on. What's going on? The Trump man kicking people out of the big hall there without a coat. How mean? How nasty?
Exactly. Yeah. No. Yesterday, Donald Trump appeared in Vermont, and as a result, there were a number of Bernie Sanders supporters who decided to show up. We actually saw the Trump campaign respond pretty heavy-handedly to this. First of all, they ended up overbooking the venue by about 600 people. And then they decided that they were going to screen those who were in attendance to ensure that only Donald Trump supporters could show up. This means that also apparently undecided voters, those who had not yet decided if they were going to be going with Sanders or Trump or another candidate, were actually prohibited from attending the rally as well. And then, of course, in sort of the highlight moment of it, when some of the Bernie Sanders supporters decided to speak up, Donald Trump urged security to toss them out and not give them their coat, saying that they should be tossed into the cold and that the security guards should confiscate their coats. So this is sort of just a little off-the-cuff moment, but one that speaks volumes, I guess, about Donald Trump's character. But that's sort of the game of the campaign season so far, just kind of seeing how bizarre this man can get.
Yeah, but I expect that from Donald Trump. I would expect that from someone like that. What took me is when he said confiscate their coats, you heard an uproar from the people in attendance, which you go, really? You're going to throw people out of, you can throw them out, but you're going to then say no coat for you in the Vermont winter? Are you kidding me?
Well, I mean, at this point, it's just getting a little bit cartoonish in terms of, how evil and scheming he can get. I think he probably just at this point needs a, big curly mustache and maybe a black top hat, and I think we'll fit, full Trumpness.
There you go. Well, it's going to get only weirder because as we continue further towards, primary time, I think he really now thinks he's going to be the guy.
No, I think he thinks so too, and I think that's going to probably be reflected as he starts going, harder against his bosom buddy Ted Cruz. We heard him today saying that Ted Cruz needs to step up and take his issue to court to ensure that nobody could issue a challenge against him, which of course is sort of Trump in his snide little way moving forward with that. But really, ultimately, at the end of the day, it looks like Cruz may actually stand a chance against him. If he does, that's probably going to take a lot of wind out of his sails, and we'll probably see, Ted Cruz start, being regarded as sort of a political genius to a large extent. He stood by Donald Trump when the rest of the party realized that he was crazy, and sort of this, really crass hope that he could maybe mooch off of his followers once Donald Trump burnt out. And it looks like he actually maybe poised to follow that plan through to fruition, which is, pretty Machiavellian, but not very surprising coming from Ted Cruz.
Yeah. I also understand that Donald has pledged no more gun-free zones. No more. First day, he's going to sign no more school zones gun-free.
Yeah. No, it's...
well, that's good. So the militia kids
orders like that are bad unless it's they're to ensure more guns are in public, right?
Yeah, I mean this is good for the militia kids. This will be good so they can bring their guns for show and tell.
Yeah, no, finally,
I know it's been a hardship.
Come on, this is Donald Trump. This is the sort of rhetoric we're going to be hearing from now on, all across this sort of issue, and this really has been bringing out the worst in a lot of people. Both Rubio and Cruz have been fundraising off the notion that Obama is going to confiscate guns, something that isn't even touched by the regulations that he put out earlier this week, considering, there's just no way you can really interpret it that way. But, this is the new era of cynicism that we have come to expect.
So let's get to the real big news, the important stuff. I understand that there was a kidnapping attempt of the president's dogs.
Exactly. This is a huge story, one that has really brought D.C. to its knees. There was a man named Scott Stockert who was arrested at a Hampton Inn near Washington, D.C. with unregistered firearms and several hundred rounds of ammunition. And apparently he was plotting to kidnap one or both of the president's Portuguese water dogs, Sunny and Bo. Bo, of course, was a gift from Senator Ted Kennedy, just to kind of give some context in there. And it turns out that this gentleman claimed to be both Jesus as well as the child of John F. Kennedy and Marilyn Monroe. My personal reaction is I'm not quite sure if that's accurate, considering most historical records indicate that Jesus actually lived before both John F. Kennedy and Marilyn Monroe, and that they apparently didn't have a child that was the Messiah. So I think the story should probably be taken with a grain of salt. And, I may even venture to say that this man could be a little bit crazy.
I would think so. But, hey, interesting lineage. And I guess if you do believe that, you're from the Kennedy Monroe, lineage there, the dogs could be yours. Could have been his dog as a kid. Who knows? Maybe Teddy Kennedy stole it.
He was just taking Uncle Ted's dog back,
That's just crazy. But, here's the thing. Exactly how did this guy plan on stealing the dogs? How did he plan on kidnapping the dogs?
I don't think they've really revealed how exactly he was going to go about that kidnapping plan. But, I'm sure there are some creative ways, to get to the president's dog. But, who knows? Who knows?
Peanut butter treats.
I don't want to speculate too hard here.
Yeah,
I don't want to give away any White House secrets.
Or maybe the next crazy person who has a fetish with Portuguese water dogs.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. I know exactly how to do it. I know what I would do if I had to do that. But I don't want anyone over here and get any bad ideas.
And the big shocker of the day: Obama vetoed the 60-second repeal of Obamacare.
Yes, he did. This was, of course, pretty shocking news. Republicans yesterday took a huge victory lap in order to, try to play up the fact that they had made the promise that they made to voters to ultimately repeal the bill. The president did veto it, issued a pretty lengthy statement explaining why, namely that this was a terrible idea and, would totally roll back all the sort of successes that have occurred in the healthcare field since the passage of it. Now we're having Paul Ryan coming out saying that the next step that he's going to be taking is coming forward with replacement legislation, which is a little bit odd since that seems like that would naturally kind of come with, or before repeal legislation. But nevertheless, that's the, sort of route the Republicans chose to take.
Interesting. And good stuff. I wanted to get your thought on this, because in the last segment, we were talking a little bit about this teenager from Fort Worth, Texas. Maybe you've heard of the story, you heard of this affluenza thing. You ever heard of that?
Yeah.
Evidently, mom was arraigned today. She pled not guilty to doing what all of us saw her do. But, it just is what it is. As Arnold pointed out in his text to me earlier, mom kind of looks like Carrot Top.
Yeah, no, that's actually I hadn't thought about that now, but now I don't think I can unsee that.
Now, do you buy this affluenza stuff?
No. I mean, this is like I think it's actually probably one of the more obnoxious buzzwords of recent years, and the fact that so many people are just kind of rolling with it is just absolutely insane. We've always had sort of the rich jerks who we've all gone to school with and all experienced within our lives who essentially act like entitled people, and trying to essentially put a nicer face on that isn't really doing anything for anybody, especially one that's just sort of a cheesy little moniker like that kind of adds a cheeky element to some pretty sociopathic behavior from people.
Now, here's my thought on it. If I'm the prosecutor there in Fort Worth, I allow the kid to stay in Mexico. Put him in one of the Mexican jails down there, and if he wants to be extradited, he should have to petition to come back. So we'll just leave him in the Mexican jail. To me, that would be, I don't know what brainiac thought, hey, let's run to Mexico, but good luck on that.
No, I like that. That's it seems like a surefire cure for affluenza. So, bravo.
That's it. Mexican prisons, the cure for affluenza. That we should do that somehow.
Yeah, we would get a Nobel Prize for that. That's that's a serious condition, apparently.
As long as I can have the money. Justin, I appreciate the time, man.
Thank you. You have a good one.
Great talking with you. Justin Duckham, Talk Media News Service. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
With marijuana prohibition finally ending in states and cities across the land, including full legalization and or commercialization in Alaska, Colorado, Washington State, Oregon, and Washington, D.C., who better than our friend Willie Nelson to lead the way for weed quality and social responsibility? The iconic musician and intrepid fighter for justice has announced that he will market his own marijuana brand, Willie's Reserve, and open a group of stores selling top-quality pot and paraphernalia. I feel like I was buying so much of it, it's time to start selling it back, Willie said of his new weed venture. I'm looking forward to working with the best growers in Colorado and Washington to make sure our product is the best on the market. A tireless champion of small farmers, civil liberties, the environment, common sense, and the common good, he plans to start rolling out his stores and products, including hemp goods, this year. And he'll expand further as state laws allow. In the typical Willie way, the stores will be, quote, the anti-Walmart model, with a core purpose of helping expand the market for small, energy-efficient, environmentally sound growers. Over the years, I've cited Willie's work in calling for legalization and restoration of hemp farming in America. I've also called repeatedly for an end to the Orwellian Kafkaesque drug war that has criminalized the cannabis equivalent of cocktail hour. 750,000 people are arrested each year for marijuana-related offenses. This is Jim Hightower saying, and now I salute the innumerable grassroots activists who've steadily pushed America from the darkness of marijuana madness to being able to light up a Willie without getting busted. Find out more at Marijuana Policy Project, MPP.org, and also at normal, NORML.org. That's normal, NORML.org. Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's populist take on what the powers that be are up to. Find out more at hightowerlowdown.org.
From UN headquarters in New York, this is Your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, for Talk Media News. We start in Germany, where allegations are swirling about government efforts to bury reporting on a string of New Year's Eve attacks in the city of Cologne. More than 120 women have come forward to police in the city, alleging that North African and Arab men who did not speak English or German assaulted them in crowds during the night's festivities. According to reports, up to 1,000 men, moving in groups of up to 50, surrounded women, robbed, and groped them. 2 rapes were also reported. Although the identities of the assailants have yet to be reported, popular speculation is that many of them were refugees. At least 1.1 million refugees arrived in Germany in 2015 alone, and the incident on New Year's Eve is prompting calls to cut down on or end Germany's open-door policy. Further questions are emerging about police conduct and media coverage. Despite receiving dozens of reports about incidents in the city, no police response was mobilized, and the Cologne police said on New Year's Day that, quote, nothing unusual occurred the previous night. Meanwhile, German public television station ZDF is apologizing for not including any coverage of the Cologne incidents until 4 days after New Year's. German political parties critical of the Merkel government's openness to refugees accuse public broadcasters of self-censoring their coverage of the Cologne incident to avoid embarrassing. From UN headquarters in New York.
So you think society as a whole is unequal? You think the two Americas? Is something real here? Well, according to a Center for Responsive Politics study, they point out that the richest 10% of Americans hold 76% of the nation's wealth. The top 10 have more than 3/4 of the wealth of the nation. But if you look at Congress, according to their study, the richest 10% of the members of Congress, they control 80% of the wealth of the total wealth of lawmakers. So it's kind of interesting, that they, even there, it's inequality is growing. Also, if you look at the campaign spending, or what they're calling the dark age of the plutocracy, since January of 2010, the Center for Responsive Politics points out that U.S. politicians have gobbled up over $500 million from wealthy donors who don't have to tell you who they are. So you're looking at $500 million going into the pockets of the already well-to-do. And you got to wonder how much of that $500 million ended up in the 10%'s hands. Just kind of a thought. Anyway, I got an email from Roger who said, I heard your interview with Joe Sestak earlier and wanted to point out that polling has him behind both former Wolf Chief of Staff Katie McGinty and Braddock Mayor John Fetterman. And he linked to an article with the Tribune, I think it was the Tribune Review that put it out, that shows that the new head of the Democratic Party here in Pennsylvania, this Marcel Groen, he's saying, look, Fetterman could be the dark horse. He could be a guy. He goes, look, he's different. He's so different, and he is really good on issues. He says most people who are different are just nuts. Not this guy. Here's a guy, and that's why I like him. I've had him on a number of times, and he's been gracious with his times. But this is a giant working class kind of guy with a master's degree in public policy from the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. So he's not a dumb guy, but he comes from the other party. He comes from a wealthy family. In fact, just somewhere here in the central part of the state. I think he's from York, actually. But here's a guy who's great on the issues, and somebody who I think, honestly, would be fantastic. Now, understand, I'd like to see Toomey go. I think Toomey's bad on the issues, top to bottom. I think he is, in that world of the 1%, doing their bidding, and really just, I think, toxic to me. I mean, just one of those guys who people look at, oh, he's a nice guy. It's kind of like my state representative. I have people say, oh, he's such a nice guy and he's such a hard worker. I'm going, yeah, but he's insane. The policies and the things that he pursues, the things that he wants to do, the things that he signed his name on, I think are destructive. The whole push towards destroying the safety net, the whole push towards the no rights at work agenda, this guy's right front and center with it. And, it just shows how far the Republican Party has gone off the rails. And honestly, I'm not thrilled with a lot of the Democratic Party either. But I like Fetterman. And I think next week we're going to reach out to him again to talk to him about this article. I mean, this is good stuff for his campaign. And Roger, I appreciate you sending it out, kicking it to us. But, here's the thing. I go back to the dogs. And how exactly did someone decide, we're gonna kidnap the dogs? We're gonna go get the dogs. Isn't that kind of nuts? And I wonder what's going to happen to him, where they've put him. I guess I should be grateful that he didn't take the gun and the hundreds of rounds of ammo to try and go after the president. So maybe Obama's kind of thinking, well, it's not horrible. Maybe let the dogs go. I don't know. Anyway, big weekend coming up. Looking forward to that. Next week, we're going to be talking with Cole Stanger, who wrote, I think, really a fairly interesting article on the gig economy. We're told an awful lot that the gig economy is growing. It's huge. There's a new study out that says that almost 14.5 million people here in the country derive a majority of their income from the gig economy. In fact, they point out that a whopping 45 million people, or 1/5 of the U.S. population, say that they have worked or offered their services in the so-called on-demand economy. So we're going to get to that next week, because I think that number is just, way out there. and it comes from the Aspen Institute. Kind of makes you wonder about that. But that's something for next week. Also Monday, the big rally in Washington, D.C. Against the Supreme Court case that's going on, the Friedrichs versus California Teachers Association, where the anti-rights at work people are pushing for free stuff for themselves, so that maybe you and me will pick up their freebies. It's basically the right to freeload is what they're looking for. So we got lots of things next week. We kick off on Monday, Made in America segment. Looking forward to that. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your questions, your comments, whatever's on your mind. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I do answer all emails personally and love to hear the back and forth. And thank you, Roger and Arnold, and all the folks who chimed in on the stuff. And like I said, if you missed any of it, thericksmithshow.com. Make sure you share it with your friends, your neighbors, and get the app. The app is free. Go through Google, iTunes. It's all there. Have a great weekend. We'll see you back here on Monday.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
It's coming like the tide of flood beneath the lunar